I call this meeting of the Columbia Association Board of Directors at 7:09 p.m. on October 27th. I am Eric Greenberg, Chair of the CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this meeting of the CA Board of Directors is being live streamed. You can find tonight's agenda and background materials on the CA Board's webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those who are watching our meeting there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that your cell phones are silenced. Board members, please raise your hand to speak and I'll record the names in the order which I see them. If you are virtual, please use the chat feature to let me know that you will be in the queue. As we move through the meeting, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate the motion as well as who motioned it and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any board members, say so. I will now call the roll. Lakey?
Here.
Dick?
Here.
Brian?
Here.
Janet?
Here.
Kevin? Alan?
Here.
Bill? Andy?
Here.
Ginny?
Here.
Sherry?
Yeah.
And I am here. There are no announcements of closed sessions or special meetings to be held or have been held. That moves us to the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I've got a question on the agenda.
Got to be seconded first.
Can I get a second first?
Second.
And then we got a second.
Yeah, I'd like to move that 10 minutes be added to the agenda on number 7G to discuss adding the Lakehorn project to the November meeting agenda.
Okay, do I have a second for that?
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any discussion? No discussion? Any objections? No objections. We'll add 10 minutes to discuss adding Lake Elkhorn to the November agenda.
I have
You got another one?
an amendment. I'd like to add 2 minutes to the vote section of the agenda to discuss a congratulations letter.
Do I have a second for that?
Second.
Is there any objections? No objections. The motion, the agenda is so amended.
I have a,
Anyone else before we approve the agenda?
Where on the agenda is that going to be? Where on the agenda?
It would be
Under board votes.
it'd be 6.
Oh, okay.
There's currently nothing there, so it would be 6A, I guess.
I'm just wondering, given various discussions and documents, is anybody expecting any votes to come from our discussion of the ethics policy?
No, that's all under board discussion.
No, it's currently under board discussion. That's why I'm asking if anybody is expecting votes, in which case we need to open up some time for that. Okay.
I don't. It's under board discussion, not board
I know it
votes.
is. That's why I'm asking.
Okay. So, are there any further discussion on the agenda? Any objections to the agenda
As amended.
as amended? Okay, the agenda then passes as amended. We'll now move to resident speak outs. I will call on you one by one the order which you signed up, regardless of whether you're participating in person or virtual. Individuals have 3 minutes to comment. Anyone representing an organization has 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask clarifying questions. Responses are limited to 1 minute each. For those of you online, please mute your microphones if you are not speaking. Anyone joining us online should not speak outside their allotted speak out time. As always, we ask you to be respectful and abide by our general guidelines of civility. Our first resident speaker is Jessamine Duvall. Jess, are you there?
I am here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Jessamine Duvall. I am the former representative to the CA board from Hickory Ridge from 2020 to 2022, and I live in Clemens Crossing. First, I'd like to commend Lakey for her recent open letter to Columbians and her excellent community leadership. Lakey is doing exactly what this board hired her to do, and she can have a huge positive impact on the future of this community if the board will step out of her way. Next, I must mention yet again the secret subcommittee meetings that this board is having. During the last work session, Alan Klein acknowledged that there is in fact a policy subcommittee that has been working on the ethics policy. I also found reference to it in Dick Bolton's July report to the Dorsey Search Village Board, which states, quote, "I have been working with a board subcommittee to write a board ethics code to replace the 27-page current code," end quote. Now that since there's no denying that there is a subcommittee working on the ethics policy, these committee meetings must be made public going forward. There's absolutely no excuse for the secrecy to continue. And yes, board members have argued that there have always been ad hoc subcommittees and work groups created by the CA board. That doesn't make them right. When you know better, do better. It's okay to change existing practices once you realize they're wrong. For the sake of the community, please admit that you're violating the Maryland HOA law and take immediate steps to correct this. Finally, I'd like to highlight something from the last work session that this board did not appear to hear or acknowledge: Jackie Tuma's clear message that it's inappropriate for the board to create a separate, less stringent ethics policy for themselves alone. Jackie, who is CA's Director of Audit and Advisory Services, said, and I quote, "In my professional opinion, and I will repeat, the board should be discussing the revisions that were proposed by General Counsel. The board should be subject to the same ethics policies as employees, along with additional parameters that are specific to the board, similar to what's currently in place and similar to what General Counsel has proposed for revisions. Instead, what I see is that the board is considering separate standalone policies and enforcement drafted by board members and then approved by board members," end quote. This board continues to endanger CA's financial health and reputation with their ego-driven, personally motivated decisions designed to protect themselves from being held accountable for unethical behavior. This will ultimately destroy the Columbia Association, and those of you on the Audit and Risk Management Committees certainly know this. Board members, please set your egos aside and acknowledge the mistakes you are making. Put the community's interests above your own, approve the recommended ethics policy, implement transparency for all board subcommittees, including ad hoc work groups, and treat CA staff, especially the president, with the respect they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Richard Bannister. Richard?
Hello. Here's a little seasonal Halloween story. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Here's a little seasonal Halloween story about unexplained events in the village of Longreach. Once upon a time, in the quiet village of Longreach, an alarm went out amongst the locals. "There's a plan," they cried, "to cut down acres and acres of the beloved forest, leaving wildlife homeless or dead, and to bulldoze and re-engineer the cool, gentle, trickling stream, scarring the landscape for generations." Yes, the locals knew these stream re-engineering plans have been carried out elsewhere in the realm of Columbia and are like Frankenstein streams, not truly a thing of nature, and they suck the life out of the habitat like vampires. They were told the Longreach Village Board had approved this plan and were to hold a meeting to explain why. In that meeting, the residents in Longreach were shown a picture depicting deep cut erosion. How scary. Only to be told later in that same meeting that the deep cut was made by a backhoe. Not so scary. Later in the same meeting, they were shown a picture of pipes and were told that it was a picture showing a gas line that had been revealed due to erosion, and the lines had to be cut and plugged. How frightening. Gas lines in danger due to erosion. But a resident of Longreach revealed that they weren't a gas line, they were drain pipes. Phew, not frightening after all. And it had been announced in the local Longreach paper, Reach Out, that homes are in danger from the stream. Scary. But a simple walk down that stream revealed that that was not true. No homes in danger, not scary. Residents have been told the stream is rapidly eroding, yet it looks much the same as it did to them 40 or 50 years ago. Not so scary, simply not scary. This tale continues, but we leave it for now, where the Longreach Village Board have reconsidered and have withdrawn their support for the project until questions raised by the residents and others have been answered. Phew, that's a relief. I, for one, can sleep at least a little better. Well, that's the end of my little Halloween story. I hope you can sleep better tonight also, and that I haven't frightened you too much. But what remains spooky and enters the realm of the unexplained is that the story of this plan by CA has contained so much false information. And with that, I wish you a happy Halloween.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rochelle Taylor and Dan Pontius on behalf of the Columbia Housing Center.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle, and I'm joining today as a 20-plus year resident of Columbia and a board member of the Columbia Housing Center. I'm here with my fellow board member, Dan, but I would like to start off by sharing a little bit about my personal story. Just like many others, my parents were drawn to moving us to Columbia for its diversity, family-friendly atmosphere, and its commitment to a positive future for the generations to come. We were heavily involved in CA activities, active members of Supreme Sports Club, spent so many summers at the pools, and CA actually gave me my first job at KidSpace. I'm a true Columbia girl, and I'm proud of that. I found myself on a personal crossroads where I want to start my family in a place where I grew up and felt so loved in, but I can't afford to do so despite how much I've worked in and given back to our community. I joined the Columbia Housing Center board because their mission, which is to champion and sustain thriving racially integrated communities in and around Columbia, spoke to me and what Columbia was built on. I also have a love for Columbia Association and everything it provided to me growing up. I see the CA mission of engaging our diverse communities, cultivating a unique sense of place, and enhancing quality of life aligning perfectly with the work that the Columbia Housing Center is trying to actually move forward. What better way to help people have a sense of place than to intentionally cultivate the racially integrated communities Columbia prides itself on, including the quality housing that's affordable and also supports that diversity. So as we look to support the future of the community together, I now lean on my partner, Dan, to share the lessons, courage, and opportunities in our journey as a guide to have even greater impact, connection, and continued partnership.
Great. My name is Dan Pontius. I'm the secretary of the board of the Columbia Housing Center, and Rachel and I we're just trying to kind of introduce the Columbia Housing Center to the CA board tonight. My day job is as housing policy coordinator at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. So I work with the housing agencies all around the region, including I work with Kelly Semino and Peter Engel here in Howard County. We coordinate regionally to carry out all the local jurisdictions' duty to affirmatively further fair housing, which is essentially trying to undo the segregation that so many lines of opportunity fall along in this region. And so what Jim Rouse started by founding Columbia in 1967 was really special. And we've learned that, those racially integrated communities are really special as well. And it was actually Tom Carbo, who I worked with years ago, who first saw the importance of that and reached out to Jane Demner. Unfortunately, two people we lost way too soon. But it was really Jane Demner at the Columbia Association who really took this on. And its roots are in the CA speaker series that Jane ran and that Robin Stimson is now redoing. And she brought Rob Braemeier, the director of the Oak Park Regional Housing Center, which is doing a similar kind of pro-racial integration apartment referral service in Oak Park. They've been doing it for 50 years. And she brought Rob to Columbia in 2016, and he really inspired a bunch of people with leadership Howard County, and so Jane started that board in 2017. It was a real blow when we lost Jane to cancer in 2019. But actually, it was the school redistricting controversy later that year that really got us to want to really move forward and get this thing going. Maureen Harris took over for Jane as chair of the board. The county is supporting the Columbia Housing Center through its community development block grant funds as part of its work to affirmatively further fair housing. We're part of the Horizon Racial Equity Collaborative. We've hired Andy Masters as our first executive director and Carletta Hickman as our landlord liaison. And we just launched in April. We've seen 150 folks looking for apartments in Columbia. So we're up and running. We wanted to let you know and kind of introduce you to our work. And we wanted to let you know, I'll put our website in the chat, but we have a fundraiser, our first fundraiser coming up at 18th and 21st on Monday, November 14th in the evening. And we'd love to see all kinds of people there, and you are totally welcome. We'd love to see you at our first fundraiser. That's a little bit about the Columbia Housing Center. And we'd love to work with you. Andy has worked with Tim Pinnell and Robin Stimson on marketing and communications and outreach. So we're already working with you, but we really welcome the opportunity. We feel like our mission to champion racially integrated communities in and around Columbia is right in line with CA, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Helen?
Yeah, thank you for this. And I've met with Andy a couple of times. One of the issues in Columbia has been that there has been no requirement for truly affordable housing. And the affordable housing we have was mostly only because Jim Rouse demanded it and funded it sometimes himself. So I'm wondering what, beyond thank you, is there anything that you all can think of that you want from CA in the way of action or whatever?
I guess nothing specific right now. We just want, I guess sort of an open lines of communication. We want to continue to be in touch. We're virtually now because Rachelle happens to be out of town, but we'd be happy to meet with folks in person. We'd be happy to share more about our work, and because we really do think we can. There ought to be a lot of opportunities to work together moving forward. So we don't have a specific ask right now. I mean, if you'd like to come to our fundraiser, we'd love that.
I got that.
But really, this is just we just wanted to introduce ourselves and let you know that we're up and running now on a small scale. We need to build up, and we'd love to work together in the future.
Great, thank you.
Dick?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for taking on this task. I agree. This is something we really need to look into. And echoing what Alan said, we'd like to know if there are any specific things that CA can do. And if you come up with anything, let us know. And you have our mailing list, so you know how to get in touch with us if you have any suggestions of ways we can help you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Sharon Boyes on behalf of Protect Our Streams. Sharon?
Hello, good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to express my opposition to the Lake Elkhorn project. Stream Restoration's attempt to fix a situation in the middle of it, while the bulldozers and excavators are removing perfectly healthy, mature ecosystems. The upland stormwater runoff continues to dump silt and sediment directly into the stream every time it rains. They claim they will reduce the required frequency of dredging the lake that was built to collect silt and sediment at the end of the situation by removing and replacing the middle of the situation, which has nothing to do with the root cause, without ever addressing the root cause. They don't cure or fix the problem or even slow it down from what we can see right here in Columbia. They don't even state that they do. This project will not mitigate 120 fire hoses blasting into the stream every time it rains. This is nonsense, guys. CA, why aren't you blistering mad at the county for not addressing this? We need to retrofit our roads and street right-of-ways and CA properties, not the stream itself. It's not the stream's fault. The dredging should have been being worked into our budget for decades now. That's not the residents' fault. I keep hearing about being given $10 million worth of work, but the phone calls I placed earlier this year suggest this project should cost more like $5 million. And if someone is giving you $10 million, I think most people these days would stop and ask themselves, geez, I wonder how much is in this for the other guy. I ask you, CA, What's in this for the other guy, the residents and existing wildlife? The money is flowing to the contractor by the millions instead of where the rain is falling. Has the flow chart been amended yet? To answer a question from the last meeting, please add boxes for the following. Any notification to the residents by CA prior to the Army Corps of Public Notice from August of 2021. When CA discussed the changes in the executed amendment that was signed in August of 2021 with the board, the fish report from October of 2021, the first and second letters from MDE, and the letter from the Army Corps that came out in January, March, and April of 2022, respectively. When does CA plan on holding an emergency meeting at this point to address what CA is doing about the concerns in those letters? Also, what about the Long Reach Village Board? They sent a letter that needs a square. They held a vote. At best I know, they're still waiting on answers from CA, so that's 2 more squares. There needs to be boxes for pertinent studies, second opinions, and evaluations before the prospectus approval square, and most importantly, squares for when the board and the public will have an opportunity to review the new plans and submit new public comments on them to MDE and the Army Corps before any approval. The lack of public notice and engagement, transparency, openness, and trust at this point from a community organization that collects fees from homeowners, in my opinion, has been extremely disappointing and unacceptable. We live here. We're not approving this project or performing this project and then driving away from the destruction and the permanent results. Have you forgot that? You have 2 choices. One choice is to bulldoze the forest and forever alter current residents' current quality of life and not fix the problem, or you can save the forest, enhance people's quality of life, and fix the problem once and for all. Mitigating upland stormwater runoff isn't a myth, a theory, or hardly impossible. In my opinion, that's called being behind the times, not having a true understanding of the topic, or just being lazy. Maybe we should ask Montgomery County how they've been able to do this. This project is proposed, has been opposed by 4 state senators, 9 state delegates, 3 county council members, the Maryland Ornithological Society, who reports 215 species of birds, the Maryland Native Plant Society, the Sierra Club, and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The Maryland NDR is concerned about the loss of Maryland DNR is concerned about the loss of critical habitat for forest interior dwelling species of birds, which are on the decline, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed several concerns, including habitat loss for a threatened species of bat, and how construction on the dam may compromise its integrity as it's a high-hazard dam. Over 600 people signed petitions in opposition, generating comments in opposition from over 470 people. I implore you, please stop this process right now, tonight. You can always sell and bulldoze the forest in the future, but you can never put it back. Just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should do something. Please, let's fix this together. Thank you for your immediate consideration, and shout out to Protect Our Ponds. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, Sharon, I hear you that in your opinion, upstream mitigation is possible. We keep hearing from lots of people within CA, and I think some outside of CA, that they've tried for years and have not found it possible. Does your group have any practical suggestions for that CA hasn't already tried for some of this upstream mitigation?
Yes, I am really not very aware of CA trying that, with the exception of very recently, since they've started the rain garden program again. I've seen that on several village newsletters that's come out. But again, we're getting these beautiful advertisements for gyms, but not what we need to do. There really just needs to be, honestly, a boots on the ground effort to educate. I think people will do this if they know the problem and how easy it is to solve it. And the Watershed Advisory Committee gets it. They know what to do. I watched a wonderful presentation on this, and there was no mention of stream restoration at all. So, and like I said, this is being done in other places. Montgomery County is doing it, right next to us. New York City, Stockholm, New Jersey. I mean, you can just look it up on the internet. And this is the way that people are headed in the future. So we should really be getting on board with this.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sherry?
Yeah, hi Sharon, thank you. Have you contacted the county, your county council representative and other people at the county and the state to ask them to move forward on providing funds to do the kinds of things that you're interested in doing?
The short answer to that is yes. This has been a full-time project for me for almost 2 years now. I'm working with state delegates, some senators. I've talked to federal officials. There's many layers involved in this. I've reached out to Mark Richmond several times, the county executive, 3 county council members are aware of this project, and this is a statewide thing that's happening. It's not here just at Lake Elkhorn. This is a statewide situation, and in short, it is all because we have to obtain these obligatory TMDL credits. I could keep going, but I'm trying to be respectful.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing in terms of this broader attempt to bring in more funding and bring in, folks that are responsible both at a local and at a regional level. And I know I have been involved in this issue for many, many years. It is terribly frustrating not to have this kind of large-scale regional effort going on. I guess my concern is we've been trying for so long, and what do you do when you don't get that help and you don't get that coordinated effort? So, again, thank you.
If I may, really just real quick. So the contractors who do these stream restorations are also, perfectly familiar with the techniques that we're discussing. And in short, in my opinion, what needs to happen is we need to incentivize those other projects. They cost them more. Therefore, I feel they should be worth more to the contractor financially and for the credits involved. And they're also one and done. So I feel like there is a way to incentivize it. Nobody would need to lose their jobs, their funding, or their credits. We just kind of need to redirect it and also put some of that definitely towards, education and getting the word out. But this is a statewide problem, and it's a hot topic, and you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. It was in the Washington Post because of Tacoma Park, just earlier this week, and with climate change, it's a big thing. So I'm just trying to suggest that we should get, in front of it and not behind it. And no one has ever reached out to our group. There's a new wonderful community group called Protect Our Ponds. And I think if maybe we had been, things had gone a different way from the very beginning, it would have been really nice for us to have been able to be involved to help with that community outreach. I talk to a lot of my neighbors all the time, so I'll just end it there. Thank you. I think there's a lot we can do. I really do.
Any other questions? I do have one quick question. So the other techniques you talked about, would those qualify for the same type of credits?
Yes, in fact, there's 31 other techniques that are upland stormwater techniques that qualify for these credits. In 2018, the Maryland Association of Counties asked the Maryland Department of Environment if they would make stream restorations worth more credit value, and they granted that request. And so since 2018, and really even prior to that, stream restorations have been considered the biggest bang for the buck, and they're the low-hanging fruit. And so that's what they've been going for, and we'd like to see that, maybe switched around. Like I said, the other projects are one and done, and they should be getting more credit. We should recognize that for the contractors.
Thanks. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And next we have Nina Basu representing Inner Arbor Trust. Nina?
Hello.
Hello.
It feels so exciting to be in this room instead of on Zoom all of a sudden. So
Well, thank you for coming.
thank you, everyone. So I'm so glad to be back here before the CA board. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a brief update on the trust's season, which is thankfully almost over, not quite. We've got a couple of events. We've got like a Girl Scout ceremony and another little event, but we're almost done for the season, and give you a little bit of an update for next year. I especially wanted to thank our crossover board members. I don't see Kevin, but just to let this board know, Kevin Fitzgerald led a architectural tour with the University of Maryland, architectural alumni. It was a fantastic event. We were thrilled that the Chrysalis was focused as a part of that tour. We're really excited to show off what's going on in downtown Columbia. Wanted to talk briefly about this year and then the process for which we are using to sort of engage the community for next year. This year, our programming, as is in your report, was really in 4 areas: cultural festivals, community concerts, family and children's programming, and activations. I wanted to talk specifically about cultural festivals to this board and to thank you for your support, but also hopefully tell you as a longtime Columbian why this is so important to the community as a whole. I loved what Lakey Boyd, CEO of CA, wrote in her recent blog post about challenging ourselves to make positive change. I loved hearing Jess Duvall go ahead and talk about that importance of challenging ourselves to make positive change. I think a lot of you have known me for a while. I am from this community. My parents immigrated here in the 70s. But for me, one thing, I was a terrible classical Indian dancer. I was literally the single worst classical Indian dancer in history of the world, certainly in history of Columbia. That said, when I was a kid in this very diverse community, in this community that I loved, these types of events, these types of performances were not a main stage. We were in a basement somewhere. You didn't have a diverse audience seeing them. You had just, well, the Indian people are over here, the Korean people are over here. And it was great because it was so much more than you would see in the 90s elsewhere, but we can do better. So thanks to our partnerships with our community organizations, CA and the county, this year we were able to really push that doing better. And we were so excited to hold so many cultural festivals. And to me, as someone who grew up in this community, again, as a terrible dancer, it was amazing to see these young people performing on a main stage, not in the back, on a main stage in front of a diverse audience. This wasn't just something people did in their little cultural pieces, it was for everyone. And watching that happen illustrates how much the investment that this board and this organization has made along with the county and the state. So I know I'm coming up on time. So that was really our big winner for this year, was really enhancing our cultural festivals, working hand in hand with those community groups we serve. I think we did some other things successfully and less successfully in terms of activations. Our board is going through a process where we're going to sit down and do our annual retreat and focus on what happens next. For next year, I just want to give this board an understanding of how we're going to continue to engage the community we serve, which is also the community CA serves. We are looking first for the board to provide some direction, including our programming advisory committee. And on the off season, we have a series of workshops and meetings that we're scheduling with those community groups. We'll be going out, talking to anyone who will listen to us to get that feedback about what next season should look like. And we're really excited about some of the partnerships we're starting to bring to next season, including, and I'm scooping myself here, we believe we're going to have a Caribbean festival and a Latin music festival, which are really community driven. They're not us going out and saying, let's check the boxes. They're bringing the community to the Chrysalis. So that's really all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If not, I'll go back.
Okay, do you have any questions? No questions? Do you have I just have one question. Do you have any other previews for next season?
So BSO is supposed to come back.
Cool.
I believe, Mr. Greenberg, you were supposed to announce that show, and then it got overheated. So unfortunately, that got canceled. That's definitely coming back. We anticipate AAPI, Pride, Holy will come back. Those are, I hate to call them established events because nothing feels established with this young an organization, but they have become established events.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes tonight's Resident Speak Out. To limit interruptions during the board discussion and voting, all members of the general public participating in Zoom will now be returned to the audience. That means you'll now no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay as an attendee and watch the remainder of the session. You can also watch a live stream on CA's live stream YouTube page. I'll now take a moment to allow our staff to make this transition. If you're here in person, you're welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the meeting. In order to ensure that the board can conduct the business in an efficient and orderly fashion, those in attendance are not to participate in discussions outside the designated resident speak out times. And please do not interrupt any board votes or discussions. Thank you for your cooperation. So I'll now allow staff to transition to the main meeting.
I'm going to refer, if they have any questions, I'll tell them you have the thing on your computer. Okay. I don't want you to run out of gas on this. Oh, Ginny?
I just want to make a change. Susan does have a question. See for the minutes. Oh, she has. Page 6. So I need this the next thing. I'll just go for minutes.
Oh.
That's all.
Approval of the consent agenda.
Yeah, so we were supposed to get some feedback about the county bill.
Okay.
He doesn't want to read it. Do it.
I guess we're all set. Next, we have on our consent agenda the approval of the minutes from the September 22nd Board of Directors meeting. Sherry?
Point of information. On page 6 of the minutes under 8C, about pre-filed state and county legislation, I had asked about the county bill, and I'm doing a brain drain about the number. I think, Wes, you had said that you would be bringing back some information.
One on development, Liz Walsh's bill?
Yeah, the one on development.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm not remembering that. Is that something that we can see at the next work session?
Yeah, I don't see why.
Yeah.
Will it be too late?
Okay, so can we just amend that?
Can I
In a
make
minute.
one point of information?
Yeah.
I mean, when we prepare these minutes, we watch the video. So I don't know if it was made at that meeting, but if it says it was not, no questions were asked, I feel confident that our board operations coordinator watches the video to make the minutes. So I'm just querying, was that at the last meeting?
I thought it was.
Yeah, I thought so.
I think
So
so
I mean,
too.
these minutes are September 23rd, that's why I'm asking. Before we amend
you're
the
saying it could be the
Right.
next meeting.
Right. And so I'm saying before we amend the minutes, because I do feel confident that the board operations coordinator watches the video in totality.
So-
Okay, you might be right
So,
about that.
yeah, so
All right, so I'll withdraw that.
yeah, so one clarification, the previous meeting was actually a work session. So this is the September meeting, which is the end of September, then there's a work session. So if it was at the last time we met, that would have been a work session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
October 14th or something.
okay, I'll
Yeah.
take a look for that. Thank you.
But the work sessions don't have minutes. Ginny?
But my concern is that if we put it off, I guess it was October 13th, if we put it off another couple of weeks, the bill could have been voted on. So we have no opportunity for input if that's what you're looking for. So we really needed to hear tonight.
I think Sherry was just interested in making sure the minutes were up to date.
No, I actually was
Oh,
interested in our taking a look at
Okay.
the bill as a group.
Sorry.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, the impact on what we're doing as far as environmental stewardship may certainly be affected. This is a countywide bill.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was the last meeting when you were asking that, and we didn't quite have the number of the bill, but I said it was Liz Walsh's. We had gotten an email on that with pictures involved. Yeah.
So that's something that can be,
But it could be voted on.
so that's something that we could address in the in 8C questions only pre-filed state legislation for today.
It would be good if we could.
Not if we're going to take a stand.
I won't have an answer for you tonight.
Okay. So then that should be addressed at the next meeting if that's still timely.
Well,
Is
if
that-
not, we can get an update anyway.
Yeah, is that sufficient, Sherry?
Yeah, I don't know when this would be voted on. That was one of the things I was hoping to find out.
Okay. So yeah, Wes, if you can do some research on that and basically provide us with a summary for the next meeting, that'd be great.
If I receive the bill that Sherry's actually interested in, the actual number.
Yeah, if you can, yeah, Sherry, if you can find out the number and send it to Wes,
Yeah, okay.
that'd be helpful. Okay. So there's no amendment to the current approval of the minutes. So by consent agenda, the minutes from September 22nd are passed. That brings us to board votes. We have 2 minutes for the congratulatory letter. So do you want to read the letter?
I think Dick's
Or Dick's,
take the lead.
Dick, do you want to read the letter?
Well, I wasn't going to read the whole letter. It's been circulated. It's simply a congratulations to the honorees from the Daily Record. And we had wanted to send that out.
All the honorees?
All of the honorees, yes.
Okay, may I add? May I add to that?
Then you can,
Yeah, the letter basically says this, the CA Board congratulates the Inner Arbor Trust, Nina Basu, who was named a Most Admired CEO by the Daily Record in its nonprofit, less than $10 million in annual revenue category. Senior Group publisher of the Daily Record notes that the 2022 Most Admired CEOs demonstrate clarity of vision, a selfless approach to building teams, and a sense of calling for a higher purpose. They are at the top of their professional careers, mentor the next generation, and make a positive impact on their communities. They inspire and motivate others to achieve their goals. Appointed as president and CEO of the IAT in 2017, Nina, under a reciprocal easement agreement with CA, has led the creation of a community park in Symphony Woods, committed to diverse programming that represents all of our community. She has brought mostly free and open programs to the park, formed lasting community partnerships, created a community-based development plan, and incredibly in 2022 received almost $4 million in state and county funding for capital projects. Her vision is clear, and she works seamlessly with both the board and the staff to bring joy to Columbia. We also congratulate other local winners, and I'm probably going to mispronounce these words, which is why I wanted you to read this letter. Troy Stovall, Tedco, Elizabeth Rendon Sherman, LG Tech, Craig Northrup, Northrop Realty, and Dr. Daria Willis, president of Howard Community College, for being selected as one of the Maryland's most influential CEOs.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to move the letter? Dick moves. Can I get a second? And Sherry seconds. Is there any further discussion? I will now call the roll. Dick?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Kevin? I think he's still not here. Alan?
Yes.
Bill? Are you out there? Andy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
And I am a yes. The motion passes. Congratulations, Nina, and thank you for all your hard work on IAT. Next, we have board discussion. The first item on the discussion is 60 minutes for the FY24 budget.
Okay, I am going to start by kind of framing both the budget process and the materials that you've been given in the pre-budget work, and kind of go through what is in it, and also kind of general guidelines on how to use it. And then I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to drill into a lot more detail. So in Susan's portion, she will take questions as you have them. Mine is really overview, and more detail will be drilled into in Susan's section. There we go. Okay, so everyone has hopefully seen this graphic. You've gotten it as a handout at prior meetings, but this is our process for this year. So we are currently at a board meeting, October 27th. I think the things to call your attention to is that we did have a survey open after tonight's meeting. It will officially open for online feedback that will go for at least a week. And then we do have a special information session for the community next week on November 1st. And then you can see that there is more board discussion, an interim vote to give staff guidance, more community feedback, and then the final discussion and approval of budget. So in terms of a summary, the main things to call attention to is that we are doing more direct community engagement. We started this last year, but really it's about the online surveys that we do a specific session. It's in webinar format, so people can ask questions of senior staff. And of course, the board process between work sessions and meetings. As everyone knows, because we discussed this at previous meetings, we did not define the fixed parameters at the beginning and able to really make sure, that we're enabling community input to inform those key decisions. So we obviously have to start with some assumptions, but those are not fixed early in the process, but instead later in the process. So as a reminder, this body set strategic priorities for staff in September, and then that we're kind of in process and expecting to have this in front of the board for approval in February. So there's a few framing comments that I really want to take a little bit of time to talk about. And I think that this is something that is important for us as an organization, not just in terms of the budget, but also in terms of just particularly the board's role in understanding how to set vision and strategy is fundamentally CA is a different organization than it was prior to the pandemic. So we're different in several concrete ways. We have fewer employees, we have less revenue, we have changed consumer behavior that we're still navigating, that is still, even with surges, giving us different behaviors. And then, of course, we do have the same assets, but they get older every year, which means that the kind of resources we might need to dedicate for repair and maintenance, let alone renovation, do shift and change. The positive way to look at that, which certainly is how we look at it, is that we have become leaner, but in many ways more nimble than we were prior to COVID. Obviously, I came in midstream in terms of my tenure, so I had seen some of these changes in process, but I will say that what we have really focused on this last year and a half is making sure we're formalizing those changes, and where those improvements happened, even if they were out of requirement, we are embracing them and integrating them into what we do today. So there is opportunity in crisis, and certainly from a leadership perspective, that's something that's very important to focus on. So those positives is, without a doubt, our teams have built a muscle, but really have a strong muscle now around managing expenses to revenue. And that is no small feat. And it is a very different culture and behavior than CA had consistently pre-COVID. We definitely have an emphasis on process improvements with a focus on efficiency, and in many cases have been able to find reduced costs. We have a renewed commitment the community engagement that really has shortened our direct feedback cycle with our customers. And when I use that term, it's a variety. It's residents. We've really streamlined processes there, but it is also people that take classes or participate in programs or perhaps have memberships. And it really is an attempt to make sure that we're delivering on what the full community values and not kind of the more established systems that people, could pick up a phone and call a certain person and get something to change, that we really are putting that community good at the top of our list. On the right-hand side of the screen is really how the world continues to change around us. And this is not pre-COVID to now. This is literally over the course of this past year. From the time that we did the budget process this time last year to even when we adopted the budget earlier this calendar year, there are continued changes. Inflation is at an all-time high, or at least, in the last 40 years. Interest rates are high. They are absolutely expected to increase. There is talk of early recession. If you don't agree with that, apparently just wait 6 more months and it will be here. And then the ongoing supply chain challenges and challenges around staffing and recruiting. These are things that are global. These are not unique to CA, but they absolutely have to color how we plan ahead, manage our resources, but also still make sure that we're thinking about the future and delivering on that. So there's a lot of complex assumptions built into all of these budget materials, and CA as an organization is complex, but at this stage, we are just acknowledging that there's a lot of assumptions that the teams make to get these estimates into these books, and there's a lot of assumptions that we make around pulling apart this idea of fixed costs and changeable costs. Now, that's something that Susan is going to drill into in more detail. I wanted to more so make some framing comments around that concept. When we try to think about fixed costs.
I thought it was.
Hello? We're getting some other, we can hear other people talking? Is that tech maybe?
The chat thing seems to be.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the idea of fixed costs, it really is, if everything at CA were to stop, and not crater, but stop, what would that really mean? So the proposition is really what makes Columbia, Columbia. So again, Susan will drill into this in more detail, but some of the things that have come up last year and certainly ongoing this year, the concept of, say, if we were to make a decision to do a facility closure, for instance, that really is a multi-year process, and there's often an initial significant cost outlay that then decreases over time. So that is not, many of these things are not binary in terms of yes or no, or it goes in the plus column or the minus column. Big decisions like that are really going to take a lot of consideration. There are often questions around class fees, or how many classes we have, or where programs are located. And when you start to change some of those factors, there's a waterfall of participation impacts. And that can be across many categories, as you see kind of outlined. Another one that I hear out in the community that certainly a lot of people don't understand to this level of detail is if there were real estate changes, right? If we were to do something in this concept of, oh, that's a valuable piece of property. A lot of our property is credited open space, and that includes with buildings on it. And so a lot of people don't realize, they see a building, they think it must be zoned commercial, it must have value. Many of the parcels that we own actually don't have that translation to a market value, and that is a unusual situation to be in, I would say, to say the least. Obviously, there is still some level of administration, even if everything were cut away and we went to just, property maintenance, there still is, people have to pay invoices and, cut paychecks and those kind of things. And then, of course, there's just a reality that we have a lot of binding contracts in terms of relationships with our lenders, with our insurers, with easements that also govern some of what those choices should be. So the board guidance we got did not include taking on some big ideas like this, but I think it's just good kind of context to keep in mind as we start this discussion. So what are the major assumptions? To recap, what we got from the board in September in terms of strategic priorities is really two directives from the board. It was essentially keep the existing array of programs and services and facilities, no major massive new changes, but do prioritize a focus on environmental sustainability, climate vulnerability, and leadership development. And then there was also a question on the capital budget side about can we see a little bit of testing of the impact of accelerating CA's capital reinvestment? So we do have that included as well. In terms of the key points that we would highlight from the staff side, that as we got those directives and said, okay, let's craft that budget together, I know there were some questions about staff putting recommendations into the budget. Obviously, every estimate that is made is put together by staff, by team, by the actual experts that are doing this every day. So I want to highlight some of that mindset. We are definitely still assuming constrained resources for all those global reasons I just said. But we are keeping a strong focus on process improvements, and it is something that I am very proud that the team has really built up, certainly in my tenure, and we've made a lot of strides, particularly in our collaborative processes that touch multiple teams and how and when those decisions are made, in what order. And I think that alone actually creates a better efficiency in a lot of our processes as well. Absolutely want to confirm open space, parks, pathways, play areas are back to being robustly operated and maintained. All 23 pools are assumed to be opened. Programs and services are back at a pre-pandemic level. Now, we can't control consumer behavior, but we certainly can put, the array of services out there. We definitely are pushing, and you'll see this in some of the highlights, a focus on employee retention, recruiting, and training, because the staffing is hard for everybody in every industry. So everything we can do to keep the great team members that we have right now, we want to make sure we're investing in them, and they really are still choosing us, and that we're a good fit to be a recognized employer. Absolutely continuing our increased community engagement and events, and improving communications. And this is in a variety of ways, but definitely does include specifically digital marketing. Continuing to improve cybersecurity, which is always an ever-changing landscape. And then we have made investments back to process improvement around automation that we're seeing some really good returns on as well. So in terms of key assumptions, where we start this process is that we're looking at a rate and cap that is similar to next year. Again, that's not fixed until the board votes on it, which we have not done yet. So I want to highlight, and again, Susan's going to dig into the numbers on each of these departments, but kind of give an overview. And this is in tab 1. If you, I think everybody has their books, but I'm now kind of working through the tabs. So this is in tab 1, page 1-4. And community programs and services, obviously mentioned in the key assumptions, the 23 outdoor pools, but also want to highlight full season of swim meets for CNSL, a modest increase in membership rates, and a solid but modest growth in total members over this fiscal year. Columbia Arts Center, which is in process, but we do know that it will be closed for about 2 months for the planned renovation. So we're getting close to that construction process, so that has to be built into the budget in terms of a revenue impact. School age services, we're anticipating all sites with 30 children, which is kind of what a class is for both before and after school care, and youth and teen programs will both increase, but we're also making sure that we're increasing access to those programs and doing a lot of that through partnerships. Community operations, we are back to full pre-COVID positions level with an additional specific administrative position for CD-Res. So as a reminder, that was part of the realignment that was done. So that's Community Development Real Estate Services. As that realignment has been implemented, it has become very clear that there is need for dedicated administrative support there. Increased funding for trash pickup, aquatic vegetation harvesting, and maintenance at the 3 lakes. Increased funding for tot lots and the play surface replacement efforts that we're going to be doing, expanded tree planting, reforestation, and then continued focus on invasive plant removal and updating and replacing benches and trail signage at high-use locations. Communications and marketing, as I touched on, definitely a focus on digital communications, and that has, you know, a lot of explanations, which is kind of expanded on in that box, whether that is the addition of actual people in position, but also really thinking through how we're delivering in a multimedia way, and that's something that we're incrementally doing, and we see a need to increase some personnel cost around content creation as we do that, but our offset is a decrease in paid marketing. So that's really, again, a capacity that we have completely restructured and shifted inside the organization. Administrative services, there is no change in the accounting, IT, and purchasing teams. The changes in administrative services are within the HR team, and it's back to the big global pressure, which is how do not only we recruit staff, but how do we make sure that we're doing everything we need to keep the team members we have. So that also includes more support for our HRIS system, as well as our DE&I initiatives. IT, you've heard some reference to this. We are in process on our CRM application, and that is being modernized, which will have a massive impact to our, users, as they're called in the software world, our customers, which again is our range of residents, class participants, and members. And then lastly, again, cybersecurity. Those costs are going up. They know the product they got, and they charge for it. And it's something that all organizations are kind of subject to the market value of. In the Office of the President, there are no staffing changes. In the President's office or the Office of the General Counsel and Office of Audit and Advisory Services. And we as staff are recommending no grants in FY24 again, which is what we recommended in FY23. And then for Board of Directors, put in particular funding for 3 stakeholder receptions, board training, and additional legal fees, and also are assuming a strategic planning initiative because the current strategic plan is set to expire at the end of FY24. And then lastly, this is kind of an overview of projected outcomes, again, at a very high level. There's a bottom line, so to speak, of $3.1 million. Community programs and services, when we pull apart this idea of changeable expenses and fixed, the department covers changeable expenses on its own, and I think that that's something that we really started talking in a lot more detail about last year, and we've been able to sustain that level of performance. In community operations, we're looking at a subsidy of almost $22 million, which comes, essentially straight out of the annual charge. And then our proposed capital budget, we're putting forward at $11 million. We do believe that that absolutely covers what we need for maintenance, and it limits borrowing, which obviously with a renewal on a line of credit at a time when higher interest rates are happening is something that we want to be very mindful of. But again, we did put 2 alternate potential projects forward with this idea of what if we accelerated capital investment. And then lastly, from the framing perspective, where are we now? So just as a landing point, this is labeled exactly as it is on the front of the binder on purpose, pre-budget materials. So this is not a draft budget. It is not being presented as a draft budget. It is not being voted on as a draft budget. It really is the first step of putting all of the materials and the estimates together so that everyone can get the information, get better visibility. And that's something that Susan is going to walk through in more detail, as I mentioned. We've talked about this before. I think it's important that the budget really be seen as a demonstration of priorities and values. It's a tool to do that. It is not simply, a set of spreadsheets. It is something that really shows how the organization, what we want to prioritize, what is of highest value to us. And then just kind of trying to put forward that the big picture questions, particularly at the board level, talking about vision and strategy and what kind of outcomes do you want to see, what is valuable that CA does and what is valued by the community. What do we do that makes Columbia Columbia, and trying to always keep an eye on how are we effectively positioning for the future. So income and expenses, drilling down into the details. So I'll turn it over to Susan to do that.
Okay. Before we turn it over, would you mind taking questions at this point?
A couple of specific questions about, just for understanding about your part of the presentation.
I think it's up to you.
Okay. In that case, we'll
for time.
Okay. So we've got two presentations. We'll just do questions after each presentation. So we'll take questions for
But if there's specific details, I'll just wait for Susan.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
Okay.
When, high level, how is the survey that you said is happening after this meeting being disseminated, and how will people access it?
Online.
So when you say, how would a community member know to go
to go to our budget webpage, or we promote it significantly on social media, and we do paid digital advertising to participate in the budget.
Okay. In community operations, you talked about an administrative position. Here in the DC area, sometimes administrative means the administrator of, meaning the head of. Are you talking about administrative support, more like an administrative assistant, or are you
It's
talking about
administrative support, but I think that'll be a more detailed question in Susan's section.
Okay, and you used the word subsidy under community operations requires an annual charge subsidy. I'm not clear what the word subsidy means in that. What other way
It means
would
it's a
it get?
direct payment from annual charge instead of it being from a revenue stream of another source. So that's the word that was put on the slide, but that's what it means.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Jenny?
Quick one. You were talking about credited open space, and I think I guess the point was that some people think we could just sell facilities, but that they're on credited open space. It's not. It's an extremely complex process. So is that about 26 or 27% that's required under Newtown zoning for credited open space? And my other question is, what do you think the impact will be if the county decides to eliminate Newtown zoning?
I couldn't answer any of those questions in the middle of this meeting.
Okay, maybe if somebody could be working on that, because that's a concern that I have. If Newtown zoning goes away, what will the impact be?
That's not being considered by the county right now.
Well,
So I guess the question would be, when do we want to dedicate staff resources if it's not actually under consideration? But I don't have that material in front of me to be able to answer that question.
okay, thank you.
Any, Sherry?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I think your point about the global aspect of what's going on economically are very well presented, because it's something every organization has to take a look at. And so I was wondering about purchasing. At one time, I seem to recall that most of our efforts were going into local, as much local purchasing as possible. In fact, in order to avoid some of the supply chain types of issues. So is this something that we're going to continue with over the course of this next year, as we have in the past?
Well, I would confirm it is a priority. We've had situations where someone further away is actually quicker and cheaper, and then we've had it where it's local. We start with local, but the supply chain issues sometimes are so specific and surprisingly isolated. I mean, you can't predict them. They are unpredictable, truly. That there's no way to be able to say, we know we're going to do this amount local. We used to be able to, I think, estimate that a lot better. It really is when we're making the purchase. I would say that we continue to prioritize starting there, but with supply chain issues, it's often just not even a legitimate option. But and sometimes in reverse, sometimes we can only get it locally, but we can't get it anywhere else. So,
Okay, thank you.
Andy?
Bill has his hand up.
Oh, Bill.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Just two quick things. Just wanted to reflect in the minutes that I joined at 8:15 this evening. Sorry for my late arrival. And just Ginny's comment, I believe the percentage of land in Newtown for open space is currently set at 33%. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, Susan.
Any further?
I'm sorry.
Wait, Dick?
You mentioned communications and marketing. I'm curious to know, do we have a full-time web person? Somebody who's, if their sole job is running the web?
Yes,
Okay,
now.
thank you. Good to know.
This fiscal year, yes.
This current.
Current one, that's what was approved. We put that position in.
That's
Yep.
good to hear.
Mhm.
Any further questions? I have just a couple questions. One, so overall staffing levels, pre-COVID versus the FY24 proposal, are we now back to pre-COVID levels, above?
No, we do not have any intention to go back to pre-COVID levels of staffing.
Okay, and my second question is, in the budget or the actual budget materials that you provide us, could you provide us a summary of the FTEs by department that has been done in the past?
Yes, that is part of the materials that will be provided at the draft budget stage.
Right.
Okay, thanks. That's all I've got, and so Susan.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm not going to read you, numbers per se, but I do want to help you understand how to use the materials and hopefully how to interpret some of that information. So if you want to look at the book, or it'll be up on the slide, this CA-wide income versus spending, this is a pictorial image of, just to help you see on a cash basis. So this is similar to the formats that are in existing budgets and previous budgets, and also in the annual report. So it's a kind of a sources and uses presentation. So it's page 2-2 in the book. So what this points out is that we would have, I knew I was going to do that on a cash basis, we would be having an excess of uses over sources. So that you see that, and I also wanted to explain that in the admin/other category there, we didn't have a footnote, but that's includes the administrative services, the president's office, the board, and changes in working capital. So we do propose here, or just show one of the many assumptions, as Lakey said, we show that we would, CA would add $3 million to the emergency reserve fund. That is in accordance with the funding schedule. And so that the target, according to our program and the funding schedule for April 30, 2024, is $8,166,000, and we're at $5,133,000. So that $3 million would meet that target. Okay. So Lakey noted that last year, or actually we did it during the pandemic, but we formalized it and presented it, I think, much more clearly last year. This effort to show changeable versus fixed in administrative expenses. So these are estimates. They require lots of assumptions that probably any 2 or 3 people would disagree over, so they may not agree with. But these are from our professional perspective and our knowledge of operations and our facilities and the organization, this is where we came down. So changeable expenses are the things that are incurred, the costs incurred to provide programs and services that would vary depending on the size of the program or service. So, and those are, for example, the school age services program, the personnel costs, the staffing, and the supplies are going to vary based on the participation in the program. So those expenses are changeable. They're not required by a commitment. There's no lease. There's no contract. They're not required to maintain our buildings or open space. And there would be, as Lakey noted, some administrative costs related to paying those people, paying invoices, and billing and collecting the annual charge, things like that. So, so on the fixed side, I crossed over there. So even if we stopped providing a service, on a great, we still own the buildings, we still own the lakes and the pathways, et cetera. So regardless, we would still have to maintain those facilities. Those are things that are in the fixed category. We would still bill and collect the annual charge. We'd still need some organizational leadership. We would still do audits to see that separately. And there'd be some minimal maintenance of community programs and services buildings. We assumed that maintaining the village buildings was all fixed cost, and supporting those community associations, the share grant, the operating expenses, et cetera, were all fixed costs. Then we would still have to insure those properties and other activities. We'd have to pay property taxes. There'd be interest on our term debt and depreciation expense CA-wide. So that's, in a nutshell, the fixed versus or changeable expenses. So the next slide shows what that summary looks like CA-wide. So the income that would be considered fixed is the annual charge. Anything that was from leases that are signed. So we have leases with with physical therapy. There's a lease here, sublease here, and some other small leases. And then other income, this is the interest that we would be earning still on annual charge, cash received at the beginning of the year, and so on. So total fixed income is a little less than $48 million. Fixed and administrative expenses. So these, in general, are the open space personnel and general operating expenses. It's half of admin and the president's office and some communications. And it also includes, as I said, the village funding. So, and then these are, other CA-wide costs. I just mentioned what they were. So total fixed and administrative expenses. This is projected for FY24 in these pre-budget materials. So again, it's not a draft. This is just where we, made a lot of assumptions and want to get your input on as we move forward. So those total fixed and administrative expenses are just under $45 million. So 44,571. So before we would have to repay our debt, which is fixed, we would have a little over $3 million. Those scheduled and required debt principal payments are $5,082,000. So actually, we'd be short some dollars on this analysis. So we'd be $1,776,000 underfunded from that perspective. Okay. So the next page, this is in 2-1. This is the CA-wide statement of activities or P&L format. This looks a little bit more familiar to you, but it still shows the changeable versus fixed and administrative expenses. So this is on more of a GAAP perspective, so it's not like the graphs. It's got depreciation and other non-cash expenses in it. We do show the changeable expenses before fixed and administrative expenses so that you can see more clearly as you drill into it, which facility or program sort of pay for their own changeable expenses. So this is the CA-wide organizational summary, and the materials that you have work very similar to the other reports that you get on a quarterly basis. You can drill down then into the programs and services that you're interested in. So again, as Lakey noted, this shows the bottom line at this point in the process would be $3,154,000, and as I noted that the well, I'll go into just mention that later. So anyway, it's $3,154,000 was where we think we would be if we use the assumptions that we provided, or applied here. So next page in the slide deck, we're going to jump to tab 4 in the book. This is community operations.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is that $3 million? Is that before the $3 million rainy day payment, or is that included?
So that's a sort of a balance sheet set aside.
So that's not in here.
Apple to apples.
Okay.
This is
Thanks.
Right. So this community operations, this is the much more relatable realignment that Lakey led last year. So these categories, I think, help the community really relate to and understand the functions, the operations in community operations. So, and again, each section of this workbook's the same. So in tab 4, that's community operations. You'll see a department summary, a brief summary. There are key budget assumptions. So we tried to be very clear and very transparent about what we assumed in these materials. And there'll be a department summary and then pages for each of the major programs or services or divisions. And as you can see in community operations, as Lakey noted, that bottom line, if you will, is a decrease in net assets. It's $21,957,000, just under $22 million, and that's where the thought is, Alan, that it requires an annual charge funding or subsidy.
Decrease in assets or cost? Assets usually I think of as balance sheet.
Right. So net assets so this phrase is the language for profit or loss for a nonprofit entity. So
Okay.
One thing I did want to point out, so in community operations on this page, you'll see that there are some changeable expenses. Those are related to event services. So we thought those were variable expenses. Those would be changeable. Those were things that would be discretionary. They're not related to maintaining and basically stewarding or taking care of our assets. Okay. The next section, we'll talk about community programs and services. So we're going to flip back to tab 3. And this is all of the programs and services that the community interacts with around arts and culture, aquatics, fitness and wellness, sports, and youth and teen activities. So, again, same presentation, that there'll be a department summary, that there are key budget assumptions, and then the department summary of P&L, and then specific programs and services. So we do have a visual presentation of the results for community programs and services. So this shows you, again, sources and uses. So income on the left versus changeable expenses on the right. And you can see at the bottom, there's a little yellow section that says this is net income before fixed and administrative expenses. So it shows.
Susan, which slide is that?
Sorry?
Which slide is that?
2-3.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Is that right? Yeah,
So-
2-3. Sorry about that. Jumping around a little bit. everybody there?
Yeah, thank you.
So again, this is just demonstrating that that entire department does, as Lakey said, meets, can basically fund its changeable expenses. And then as you dig into it, you'll see that some programs do and some don't. And that would be for you to decide. Okay. And if you want to see that in a gap kind of presentation, here you can see that in FY24 proposed, the net income, it's abbreviated net inc before F&A expenses, is $2,733,000. So even on a GAAP perspective, the department does cover its changeable expenses. Okay, next part of the conversation is to talk about the proposed capital allocations and some of the assumptions that we made here. So if you flip to tab 10, and that's page 10-1. So again, just to orient you to the materials, this is a summary of the Category 1 and Category 2 projects, the allocation to Category 3. There's an explanation here that describes what those three buckets are. Behind that is a detail on each project that's listed here. And so I won't walk through every single one of those, but I think as you look at those, you'll see the reflection. It's very clear, I think, on the capital side, the emphasis on environmental sustainability and on that also that it meets. So I did want to point out that technology improvements is a cyber related initiative. So this is to replace equipment, hardware that is reaching its end of life, and end of life means no longer supported, and so that is a cyber risk. So this is a cybersecurity initiative for technology improvements.
What do Q and LS mean?
So those are whether the reason for the project is quality related or legal or safety, and we've used those designations for many years. So we're bringing forward this recommendation, and we will continue with that recommendation. I believe that the total for capital budget for FY24 be $11 million again. So for FY21 and 22, it was $8 million each year. Last year it was 11, and we would propose that it stay the same. That $11 million is a 38% increase over those COVID spending levels. So that's a significant increase. We are confident that this meets our normal maintenance needs. So we're not in a situation that things are not being taken care of. They are. What this doesn't do is it doesn't allow for any new capital amenities. But again, we were also responding to and paying attention to the community survey that was done earlier in the process, where it's clear that those respondents favored maintaining what we have over adding something new. It doesn't reduce the replacement cycles of things like pathways, bridges, and it's still, we believe that it's reasonable and appropriate given the continued pandemic constraints on membership and user fee income. And then it reflects our concerns. We would not, we'd be very concerned about going any higher given the rising interest rates and the general economic conditions. There, as Lakey noted, we got this, the gathering consensus is a recession by mid-year, calendar year 2023, second quarter 2023. That's calendar quarter, so that would be April, May, June, just as the new fiscal year was starting. So
are our interest rates on our loans fixed?
So on the term loans, they're fixed. On the line of credit, it's variable.
And when does that readjust?
It's, so, I don't,
Oh,
shoot.
it's fine if you don't know.
Yeah, monthly? How?
Oh, is it really that frequently?
Line of credit?
It's based on the new SOFR rates on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Ooh,
You
wow.
don't have any borrowings under the line.
Oh, good, okay.
So that, like you mentioned, that the existing line expires in June. We've, with Lynn, under Lynn's leadership, which was very smart, we've initiated those renewal conversations early because also, in part, we do have to shift off of LIBOR to this new rate. So it is a little more complicated this year.
Thank you.
Let's see. So we did, though, look at, and we, sort of put our collective heads together here and said, if the board did decide to take on the risk of accelerating our capital improvements beyond 11 million for next year, there are two projects that we would say could be moved forward, from 25 or 26 to FY24. We would recommend only one just for the dollar magnitude and the impact on the operating budget. So those two projects are some dredging at Lake Kittamaqundi. It's hotspot dredging for $1 million and some renovations at Supreme Sports Club. So those of you who were on the board back in 2020 would remember that we were working forward on a sort of a multi-phase plan of renovating Supreme Sports Club and areas that really needed it. And so a chunk of that work was done, but we stopped that kind of mid-process. And this would pick that up and move us on to the next phase. So if you flip to so what you need to keep in mind is that whatever we do on the capital side impacts operating. So the Lake Kittamaqundi dredging, we don't see any incremental operating expense in FY24 because of when the project would start and finish. So we would not expect it to be completed until 25, and that's when we would start depreciating it and incurring interest expense on that expenditure, on that cash outlay. So just to remind you, CA uses what's called a half-year convention for depreciation expense. So when an asset's placed in service, there's a half year of depreciation that's recorded, and then after that, it's a full year. So that's why you see big differences between FY25 and FY26 for the Lake Kitt dredging, and then from FY24 and 25 for the Supreme Sports Club. So. So the Lake Kitt dredging has a 5-year depreciable life. So we are depreciating that over about 5 years, and that's consistent with how frequently we need to hit those hotspots. The Supreme Sports Club renovations, because of the array of things, assets that would be bought or built, the useful life ranges from 5 to 20 years. And the average is about 11 years, and just a flat old average, not weighted. So this, from FY26 and beyond, that would go 3 more years, well, 4 more years for Lake Kitt, and another, 9 years for Supreme. So it's not to be, you have to think about this. It's something to be considered. It's not just a this year issue.
And Susan, if we went over what we have budgeted for the capital expenditures, is that based on borrowings?
Say that again?
Do we need to borrow for our 11 million capital expenditures? Or would we have to borrow if we go over that?
So we're at, I think we would expect that we would be dipping into the line at the end of the fiscal year, right? About March, April is what we would think is likely. So if we did add, it would be probably more likely that we would be.
And do you see a scenario where, so if 11 million is maintaining, and that's the new sort of baseline that, and we have to borrow at the end of the year, does that accumulate over time, or is it more of a timing of income?
So at the beginning of that process, so for FY24, say, we would be paying that off when we receive the annual charge income. But but that just shifts the potential need to draw on the line to earlier in the year.
Right.
So what CA had done for a long time when the short-term rates were so good, we would just let that start to build, let that process sort of grow, and we would end up with a balance on the line of credit of 10 and 12, $15 million, and then we would term that out. So. I don't know, if we would do that same strategy now. It depends on the rates and what's long-term versus short-term looks like.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is if we can't cover the expense of an $11 million capital budget, should we be considering something a little lower that we can cover?
Yeah, no, I don't think so at this time. I think I would be comfortable with that this year. And then I think it's a year-by-year thing, and it depends really on what the economics look like next year. And what we showed, again, Lakey pointed this out, made it clear on the operating side, but we did the same thing on the capital side with the pandemic. If we have to, we can stop, and slow down mid-year if we have to. Just because it's approved doesn't mean we would spend it. And
Right.
so we would just be watching that carefully.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Susan? Andy?
Yeah, Susan, I was noticing as we went through the insurance taxes line increasing significantly, percentage-wise. I mean, some of them are going from 20, and some of them are like a 50 or even a 90% increase. Is that all insurance?
Yes. So the insurance expenses. Insurance expense is allocated to the facilities and programs on various bases depending on what the line of coverage is. So things that are related to employees is based on headcount. If it's insurance coverage related to visits or general liability, it's based on visits. So there's various ways that we allocate those costs. So it's not a one-for-one, like I wouldn't say that the ice rink's insurance is going up 30% because of specific issues related to the ice rink. It's an allocation process. Okay, that said, we did increase insurance overall for a couple of reasons. So that the markets are, we saw significant increases last year at renewal on cyber, on general liability, EPL, the employment practices coverage, and also on property. And we just, the indications are that those lines will continue to go up regardless of what CA does. And we've been hearing already, or we hear, I shouldn't say already, we hear every year about our wood frame construction and issues with that, and then with these storms in the south, that's going to push up the whole industry. But we also felt that with some matters that the Columbia Association's been facing, we did increase insurance for potential non-insured matters and for issues where our deductible is so high, we would have to cover that before insurance kicked in. So,
Dick?
I see on all of these you have allocation for admin and things like that. That's basically our overhead charges that go back to the departments.
yes.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Alan?
Couple of things. First of all, thank you for this chart, like on 2-3, showing community programs, income and expenses. It's what I thought from the past, but wasn't sure I heard that. you do use the word FY24 proposed in multiple places. I assume we should put quotation marks around proposed, and it's like possibly proposed, maybe pre-proposed, proposed. This isn't actually, as Lakey said, a proposed.
So
budget.
the language we would use, that we'll use later is draft.
I see, okay. And then I was getting confused early on. You showed us page 2.1 on the slide, but just before that, you showed one of those multicolor graphs under fixed and admin expenses. I was trying to line up the numbers that I saw on page 2.1 with the numbers I saw on that slide. They weren't way off, but they didn't seem to line up, and I was trying to figure out, was I looking at the wrong thing, or?
Yeah, the slide is just a different presentation of, so in the slide, and we share the slide deck, we're working on it this afternoon, literally, but that's, what's on 2-1 doesn't reflect the allocations in a way that makes sense for the fixed versus changeable. So if you look at the specific programs and services, you can see that there's a piece of admin that's fixed or changeable. That when it's all consolidated, those allocations wipe each other out. So I did that other presentation in the slide deck to make it more clear.
Andy?
Okay.
Andy?
Yep. 2-2 is cash.
It is, and it's a modified cash.
Right, modified cash,
Yeah.
and 2-1 is GAAP.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a difference just
Right.
between GAAP and the modified cash.
Right.
So I noticed if you looked at school aid services, there was a significant drop in income from this year, and I just wondered kind of what might be going on.
Well, it's not what might be going on, it's what happened, actually.
Oh.
That's the trouble, the challenge with doing the first quarter estimate. School age services hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
And we had significant number of students registered, but unfortunately, we did not have a significant number of teachers to teach them. So we have a lot of waiting lists, so the second quarter estimate will see that revised down significantly as we continue to try to find teachers. But everybody's trying to find teachers right now.
Yeah, I know, because I looked and said, wow, a $600,000 drop from what we think we're getting this year to what we're going to get next year. I'm thinking, wow, okay, so I'm going to see a revised estimate
Yes,
of what we actually
the second
have.
quarter
Okay.
estimate will be different.
All right, that makes much more sense, thank you.
Any further questions? I do have one question. So I'm looking at the changeable expenses, and I see that they're going up around 4%. And then I look at the fixed expenses, and they're going up 10%, which is about $4.5 million. So,
What page are you on?
2-1.
Thank you.
And the changeable expenses are going up about $800,000 from 23 and change to just under 24. So the question I have is, why are fixed expenses outpacing our changeable expenses? I would think fixed expenses would be relatively fixed.
Well, you can see what some of the changes are. So $1.2 million of that is depreciation. So that's the new capital assets that are being placed in service in this year. So that's a fixed cost regardless. So that's reflecting our capital reinvestment.
But even comparing the percentages across similar lines, looking at personnel expenses, I see 4% versus 12%. General operating expenses, I see minus 8% versus
Minus 5.
or minus 5% versus 6%. Sorry, my short-term vision is not great with glasses. But so even going across the different expense categories from changeable to fixed, the fixed in each case is outpacing the changeable. And if fixed is really fixed, does that have some significant long-term implications for the economic health of the organization?
Probably so.
And so the question I have is, how do we address that as a board?
Well, that's what we're doing here, is looking at the way that we do that is by managing the capital expenses, managing the changeable to revenue, managing the things that we can. But the fixed cost, if you dig into that, It's, primarily the open space and, asset maintenance and support there. And for the, that's the biggest single component probably there. And we'll dig into variances as we refine the project, but we didn't dig into the, specifics. of those.
It might be worthwhile trying to make sure that we don't let the fixed expenses get out of hand.
Don't worry.
Yeah, too quickly.
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about that.
The other comment I have is looking at the tot lot capital budget that's at 511. I assume that's, and it calls for 6 tot lots, so that's an average of about $86,000 per tot lot.
The details behind there should tell you what that is.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that's 6 Rascal tot lots? Is that what the assumption is?
Or equivalent.
Yeah, but they're basically 6 Rascal style.
Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Any last questions? Bill?
No, let Bill go.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure I had this clear based on your question. And my follow-on is, aren't fixed costs tied to an asset because they don't go away? If a program goes away, a fixed cost does not mean it's fixed as far as a number. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I was on the right page there.
Yep,
Thank you.
you're right.
Andy?
I got just one last question. So in the community development and real estate services section, I noticed that the operating expenses were going up quite a bit from this year. Is that once again a problem with the way the current estimate?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the way that that we haven't pulled in all of the related expenses from the other areas where that's come. And it's, there's also there is an increase over the current year.
But it's mostly putting expenses where they belong.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks. So that, assuming there's no other comments, that is time for this. Oh, Ginny?
Yeah, Susan, I'm not sure I know how to ask this question, but I'm looking at the Board of Directors, page 8.2, allocation of administrative services expenses. Is there a way we can, or I can learn more about how that, what is the process there? How is that done?
Yeah, that's in the budget. Every year, there's a little description of how that's done. So it's not in this because this isn't the budget, but you could refer to that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is it when staff attends here, there's what percentage, but also if they're working on something that a board member requested, is that?
So it's an estimate and an average over a period of time. So it's not we're not tracking, it's not like billable hours.
Oh, that's.
I had at least one closing comment. If we're out of time, if I can at least make the comment related to schedule, I can skip the other part. So I did want to just reiterate that I believe it's next Tuesday is November 1st, and we're having the public-facing information session. The online survey opens tonight, and we'll be promoting it, as I mentioned earlier. I did not mention when I answered the question earlier, but it also does go out to all of the villages, and they have been very good partners in circulating that in their newsletters, and so I did want to also add that on. I wanted to specifically call to the board's attention that our next board meeting is on November 10th, and the budget is on the agenda for discussion. So if you have detailed questions, we need those by November 2nd, which is next Wednesday at noon. So this is a very tight schedule that staff committed to when we laid this out, with a lot of opportunity for the board to interact in meetings. We have to have questions ahead of the meetings if you want us to have prepared information to answer them. There's a limited amount that is going to be able to be known off the top of our heads. So submitting those ahead of time, I think, at least in my experience, significantly assists in discussion. So I can send out an email reminder, but again, it's next Wednesday, November 2nd at noon, because in order for staff to have time to review them and hopefully get it posted in Friday's packet, because again, we meet every 2 weeks, but we are posting packets a week ahead of time, we need the board commitment to get us those questions by noon next Wednesday.
Okay, 2 questions. How would you like the board to provide you those questions?
Well, I'd prefer them in the board form that we use, but if you want to email them, that's fine around the budget, because we will not be answering them via email. We will just compile them and put them in the packet so all board members get the same information at the same time.
Okay. And second, for the next meeting, are there any votes you foresee scheduled on the budget, or is it just discussion?
No, discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Just to the vote would be in December, at the meeting in December.
Yes.
Okay.
December 8th.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, so that wraps us up for time for this section.
I do have a question about that last exchange. We're voting in December on just the beginning framework. We're not voting on the whole budget.
No, you vote
Yeah.
February 23rd on the.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure that was clear to everybody.
Okay. So next on the agenda is 30 minutes for the ethics policy revision. In your packet, we have multiple ethics drafts. One of the things I've noticed that over the last 6 months that this issue has been bouncing around for quite some time now, and I think we're at the point where we need to sort of break this up into manageable chunks to get this done. So what my suggestion is, let's break it up into 2 parts. Look at the ethics code as one document and be able to work on that, and then look at the enforcement piece as a second document and be able to work through and work on that. They don't necessarily have to be voted on the same day. It would be nice if they were. But if they were voted on separate days, then I would basically recommend that they go into effect at the same time. So if you vote on one day and then the next at another meeting, that they wouldn't go into effect until they're both passed, so we don't have conflicting rules. So that's basically my recommendation for how we should proceed, because right now trying to do the whole thing all at once has had us spinning our wheels for quite some time. So with that, I will open it up to the floor for discussion. Andy?
I like that. I think that's a very good way to proceed.
Thanks.
And I like, too, the part, because I'd been worried about that, too, about if we subdivide it and we approve something, and then suddenly we've got that part of a document and all the other existing documents, and that's going to cause real press. But
you'll have a temporary mess in the middle, which I want to make sure gets resolved one way or another. And Brian?
I would just suggest that the 3 people that are working on it communicate together, more like a committee, so when it comes back, we know if they've got conflicting pieces, they've actually discussed it.
Dick?
Alan.
Alan.
Well, but it's really about when the board decides, not about the.
Yeah, it's
the work
I understand that.
doing.
Yeah, the key thing is that say we decide, okay, we're going to break this up into the code and the actual procedures. We get the code passed. We don't want to just enforce. We don't want to put that into as a official policy when we still have the old procedures, because they're not going to. It's not necessarily going to make sense, and you could have some odd gaps. So what I would say is we pass that, then we get the procedures done, pass that, and then they both go into effect together. So that's basically.
I just want to. Can I just clarify what I said? It's just that when this subject's come up before, there's a discussion of there's people like Dick and Andy weren't working together, and Wes wasn't working together. I was just trying to sort of see if they could communicate together, so when we get presented something, then there's anything that they've got concerns with have been worked out, instead of us seeing this conversation go about. It seems to me that should be done before the meeting, not we're taking up time while we're trying to prove something.
And one process is so I'll use an analogy for an item that's going to come up future tonight is looking at the evaluation process. So one of the things I was doing was working directly with Monica, head of HR, to go back and forth and constantly try to keep refining that policy and then to bring it to the board. So that's certainly a strategy is for us to work directly with Wes and go back and forth. Dick?
Well, I'd like to give a little progress report here. And I want to make it clear, I'm not writing this. I am trying to edit a lot of comments that I'm getting from other board members, and I'd like to bring Wes into the conversation too and make sure that he sees what we're doing and get his feedback. Andy and I have been having a discussion, and I think we're going to get together next week to chat some more. I had sent him a copy of my latest draft that was, again, based on what people have been telling me. And he came back with 2 pages of very good suggestions. I did a red line to send to Andy to review. And so what we're trying to do is get something together that we can take to the board that will be a nice, tight little document. And as as Eric has pointed out, it will be, we got some professional advice recently, it will be an ethics code. That is the key thing. And on the second piece of it, the enforcement piece, there are probably a series of questions before we just start drafting stuff. Some questions about, who gets to vote on things and what the procedure is for filtering out frivolous claims and And what I'd like to do is collect those questions that I think there may be a difference of opinion on and send those around just for people to mull over. But again, this isn't going to be official until the board votes on it, and everybody will have materials beforehand. And again, as I say, I'm simply trying to gather people's insights so that when we do come up with a proposal, a draft, it will reflect as much opinions as we have. And again, it'll be a public meeting where we will go over it and decide if this is what we want. And there's no secret stuff involved. And I encourage everyone to get involved. And I've been sending out drafts from time to time to the board just so people have an idea of where we're at any given time.
Okay. Jenny?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether all the board members are on the same page. My understanding is that what you're talking about is a board code of ethics.
Yes.
The first document, like you were saying, and the second one is a board enforcement of that code for the board. Then that leaves, what's left there is the staff thing, which is HR. Has more expertise than anybody else to develop that. So I think, maybe I misunderstood Eric, but I think Eric's point is when it all gets done, then it goes into effect, like you would with legislation. You don't allow one thing to go into effect before the other one is completed. Is that where we are? Or?
I'd like to interject here because that's not the understanding that I'm getting from Dick and Andy, is that we were going to have an ethics policy that addresses codes of conduct that apply to the board and staff. It can be broken out by chapter in that policy. Then they're also saying then we'll have a second piece that will be the enforcement part.
Yes.
What you just described, Jenny, would be us having 4 separate documents, which is where we are right now. Mm-hmm. I'm agreeable to having 2. That's fine. I've never disagreed with that. But the issue is that what's being described now is a process that has already been done. So as I've said before, I don't want to restate things that I've been stating for the past 6 months. We have a base document, one that I generated, and we were doing just that. That was presented to the board. The board was presenting their proposed changes that you had reached consensus on. I literally made those changes to the base document that I have. And that base document is still before all of you. You have it. And there's some red lines in there. We can continue with that process. If we want to split that base document into an ethics policy and then an enforcement procedure, I'm more than amenable to doing that. All we have to do is, like we were doing before when Janet was the chair, you submit those questions, those comments, those concerns, just like we were talking about with the budget, submit them to me. I can easily implement them into the base document. Dick has made some comments here. He submitted it to you, to this board. In his comments, in his memo, he said that he has added a lot of the things that I had made comments on from his original submission. So if you're adding those comments back, what does that look like? It looks like my base document all over again. So we can continue to work from my base document, submit these comments, concerns, I will implement them just like I had been before. We don't have to reinvent this. That's what I've been saying for the past several months. It's not difficult. I will work with you. That's what I was doing. You guys were giving me your comments, your questions, your concerns, and guess what? I was implementing the ones that made sense. And right now we have a document, the base document that I'm referring to. It contains all the elements that a sound ethics policy should include, and we can work from there.
So I think one concern is making sure that we're very clear on what parts apply to everyone, what parts are board specific, and what parts are staff specific. So when someone reads it, they know exactly what parts apply to them.
Absolutely. And literally, if you look at my base document, it's got a very specific, very detailed table of contents, and it's got very bold chapters at the top of each one, at each chapter. I mean, it's very clear what's broken down. And just as Jackie said before, at the last board meeting, this board, you have CA equipment, right? You get laptops. You guys are right now in the process of dealing with the budget, right? There are things that you guys do that are part of your official duties that are encapsulated in the ethics policy. So we can't separate the board out because you are part of this organization. So if you look at my base document, it is a sound document, and I can continue to take questions from everybody, just as we were doing before, and I can implement them into what is already here. We don't need to start over again.
Just a point of information, I asked for a laptop this year and was told we don't get laptops, so.
You get iPads.
Equipment.
You get iPad. Any, Dick?
We did have a document that was put together, and I think it was a big improvement over what we'd had before. But the board voted not to accept it. And this is why we've gone in, and there are two things. There's the content and the format. And I think the content is pretty much the same in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. It's the format that's been changed. And that's not the sort of thing where you can go line by line because you're taking a big chunk from here and putting it over here and you're changing the titles and everything. And yeah, you gave a long thing about the differences between the two of them, and I was able to fix a lot of that. What I wanted to see, and I think what the board in general wants to see, is like an eight-page thing that we sign, not a 20-page document for everybody, but here's something that we sign that's got all the key information in it. And
a number of those pages, though, Dick, are true. Like if we separate out, which I'm amenable to, the enforcement process, that's several pages right then and there. And then a lot of those pages were also signature pages. So I mean, we can easily get it. I mean, but brevity shouldn't be the metric that we're using for our ethics code.
Well, again, I think Andy and I would love to sit down with you and talk this thing through. I don't think it's a not invented here kind of a thing. I think we can come up with something that everybody likes. And just for fun, because somebody said, well, how would our board ethics code apply to ordinary employees? I just went through it, and I did a little redlining, and I think, if you wanted to use that as a basis, but I don't, it's not the board's job to write an ethics policy for staff. And, that's an HR question. And so I'm just worried about having something for the board that gives directions as you have to zigzag through. Oh, that applied to us, that doesn't apply to us, this is a difference. I just want some nice, clean documents. And like I said, any time that you want to sit down with me and hopefully with Andy and just look things over and talk it through, let's do that. I think we can come up with something that we're all happy with.
So, Alan?
Yeah, I would support that, and it's because what I'm hearing is what we have to make a decision as to whether it's the document that was originally proposed back in the spring, I guess. I wasn't here then, but whenever that was. And is that the starting point and we modify that? Or is it the document that Dick and Andy have been working on and we start with that and modify that? So that's one decision that has to be made. But I do agree that you could all talk it over. The one thing that I just want to clarify from what you said, Dick, you said it's not the board's job to write an ethics policy for the staff. It is the board's policy, I think you would agree, to approve, because we're talking about ethics policy for the organization, and that is our job.
So, again, sure.
So I asked this at the last meeting, and so I'm trying to understand if the answer has changed. This idea of Dick sitting down with Wes, my question last time was, does Dick represent the board and all opinions on the board so that if there is a back and forth between Dick and Wes, it would still obviously come back to the board for a vote. But given how many differences there continue to be, there has to be an arbiter of where is that decision. Obviously, I would highly recommend that be the attorney, but I want clarity that if that work group happens, that everyone on this board is saying, yes, what Dick and it sounds like perhaps also Andy represent, the board is comfortable that we then would put that back on an agenda and there would not be significant work to do. Because the concern is that we would go through that process and then we would still have to start over again for all the reasons that Wes has already outlined.
So here's my vision or goal, is that by taking the enforcement piece out for now, we've sort of made the problem half as big. And then the idea here is we've got what Dick wrote, we have what Wes wrote. If the content really is pretty much the same, we should be able to converge. I realize the format's slightly different, but we should be able to get these two documents to converge to something that both Wes and Dick and Andy can agree to, that basically maps to an ethics code. So that's sort of the goal, is can we get to the point where what Wes has produced and what the board has proposed, what board members have proposed, and get some convergence there. And when we can get some, yeah, I know.
Don't mean to interrupt him.
But if we can get some convergence, that signals to me that we're ready to vote on it. And by splitting the two pieces up, I think that gets us to that convergence a lot faster, I hope. Alan?
I would just add that for me, I'd be perfectly comfortable with a short list of, here's the places where we differ and we need the board to weigh in. That if there can't be total convergence, and I see that Bill has his hand up.
Bill?
Yes, thanks, Alan, and thank you, everybody else. I just want to make sure I understand what was proposed here as far as what Lakey had said and what also she voiced at the last meeting. If Dick and Andy are working with Wes on this document, I believe what was said was that the rest of the board would not have any further comment, and the policy would either be voted in as presented.
No.
Or we would go back to the original policy we had at the beginning of the year. Is that what's being
No. It'd be.
I was unclear on that.
No. It would be presented to the board. It'd be subject to debate. It would be in the packet, so you could ask questions ahead of time if you have concerns. It'd be certainly subject to debate, and then after debate, a vote. Sherry?
No,
just
Eric, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that. Is everybody in the room
That's the
nodding their
CA
heads?
process for passing policy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to remind folks how we have done things in the past when we've had work groups, whether it's board member work groups, or in the past when we've had board members working with staff members, and yes, we used to do that. It would be a process where a series of recommendations would be made. We did that about the committees. Andy presented a list of possible changes.
Yeah.
They were not, it wasn't you accept all of them or you accept none of them. It was a series of changes, and the board looked at all of them and said, okay, we think 1 is good and we think 6 we probably don't need, and but that was the source of the debate. We did the same thing when we were talking about the minority business issues. So we took a look at a policy. We said, what kind of changes can we make to make it more effective? We had a list. The board didn't have to accept everything, but it gave a structure. So I think that's what we're talking about here. Coming up with a structure and saying, here are 10 things that we think could make this more effective for the board. And that's what leads the structured focus of the board. Take them all, take none of them, whatever you want to do with it.
And the key thing to amplify your point is that we need something to debate. There needs to be something that we can have in front of us to debate, and having 3 or 4 or 5 different things makes that structure pretty difficult. Janet.
So that's the approach that we started in March, and most people didn't prepare. And so we didn't get much comment. We didn't get many questions. And so I'm just curious what's going to change that now, because that's what we tried to do 8 months ago. And here we are still spinning.
So,
I don't understand. I mean, that's exactly what we tried to do.
And that's why I'm trying to take this and break it down into chunks. So if we take the code piece and separate and debate that, maybe that gives us better focus, and that'll allow people to have more questions.
I'm not sure why that would, but.
Because it's a narrower scope. When you narrow the scope, people can focus a little bit better, is my theory. We'll see. Ginny.
Yeah, I completely support what Sherry's saying, and I think the reason we'd break it down is the enforcement is really more complicated. We learned other things tonight that we have to consider. So I think we need to spend more time on the enforcement part. And let's just do the code part, get that off the table, and instead of looking at all this.
I'm simply saying we could have done that 8 months ago, so I'm just not sure why this is just.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah, but
that approach. But that's one easy approach. I already agree. That's a fine approach. I think we're all on the same page on having a policy, an ethics policy, and an enforcement procedure. So that's addressed.
Okay. Leggy?
I think what I said last time, and I don't understand what the difference is literally in the past 2 weeks, is that when things are circulated via email, people weigh in and there's not agreement. And so again, this meeting can transpire. And Wes has already said yes. We've said separate the two if that seems to be easier. But the key is that when it comes back to the board, if there is not representation on this subcommittee that actually represents, generally speaking, the board, and instead it is I don't know, 10 separate opinions, or is it maybe a total of 4 separate positions? So the key is the differences have been so vast in the drafts, which is why they're submitted separately in the packets. There's no ability to have an easy comparison to do a merger. So I think that the key is the meeting can happen, but if the differences are that vast, but we don't have an understanding from the board, even when we have this general discussion, what are the key issues from the base draft that people feel is important to change? Dick continues to represent that his changes are only format. Professional staff does not agree with that characterization.
Alan?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, as I understand it, Dick has made some changes to his document, and I haven't seen any staff response to those changes, so I don't know how close we got.
Presented them at the last board meeting in a
To the
memo.
changes, no, as I understand it, you presented very clearly a set of things which then Dick has responded to and made some alterations. So I haven't seen staff's response to Dick's alterations based on your memo of October 3rd or whatever date it was. Secondly, I'm pretty comfortable that around this issue, Dick and Andy probably represent a wide swath of opinion on this board.
Both ends of the spectrum.
And I also make a bold assumption, could be proved wrong, that they would welcome, and I hope Wes would welcome, any other board member who'd like to participate if they feel like that doesn't represent them. But I'll just say personally, I'm comfortable that we will get through that process if they actually have a good, solid one or more meetings, put something together, a proposal, with or without a couple of here's the items we couldn't come to agreement to, we'd like the board to weigh in on. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Any further discussion, questions?
Just one comment. So I would agree with that, and that's what I was trying to say right at the beginning. I just want to emphasize that, yeah, I feel comfortable as well.
So seeing no further questions, I think what the board is basically resolved to do is split the document in half, have a ethics code, have an enforcement piece. And the first thing we'll tackle is the ethics code. And so what I'd like to see is Dick and Andy get something together, run that by Wes, and try to figure out where the differences are. If the differences are significant, those should come back to the board for the board to address. If they can be ironed out, that'd be great, and then you can have hopefully a converged document that could come to the board for a vote. But yeah, I'd like to see where this goes. So next on the agenda, we've got 10 minutes to discuss the CA operational practice for votes in village elections. I don't actually see any.
Page 94 of the packet.
Page 94 in the packet.
Yeah.
So basically this comes up with, in the past, CA's generally cast, previous elections before this past year, CA's generally cast votes where CA can vote, which is not all villages, but they generally casted their votes with the winner. This past year, that procedure's changed, or the past spring, where CA abstained from all votes. The big difference here is that could potentially affect quorum. So the question to the board is, should we develop a policy for how CA casts votes? Ellen?
Yeah, I absolutely think we should. I'm in agreement. It's only this last paragraph on this page that speaks to this, but I absolutely agree that CA should refrain from endorsing or supporting any specific candidate. But that's never been what CA votes have been about. It's been, regardless of which candidate it is, it's whoever gets the majority vote of the residents of that village. And it's in support of the village, not of the candidate, in support of the village making quorum. And to me, that's always made perfect sense as a way for CA to support the villages and keep it separated from endorsing or speaking for any candidate. My concern this year was that the way it was handled was although it didn't speak any particular candidate's name, it sort of put a cloud, talked about the candidate slate. It put a cloud over every candidate that was before the voters.
Any further questions? Dick?
Is this up for a vote tonight?
No, this
no vote.
is
not a
discussion.
vote. Okay.
If anything, what we'd have to do is draft a policy, because there's no policy drafted per
I
se.
thought we had one, didn't we? Isn't that in the?
Behind Wes's memo
Oh.
is what Dick submitted.
Oh, okay.
Wes's memo is in response to what Dick submitted.
Oh,
I must
So that
I'm
draft
sorry, I
was
must
more than
this is
just
the-
about voting. It also addressed CA board member removal. It addressed CA board member voting within its own meetings, and then it addressed CA involvement in elections. So it was a much more than just CA's involvement in village voting. So my memo addresses that. It's there for your perusal.
Ginny?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Wes. So this is yours, or is this what Dick wrote?
That is my memo from Michael W. Anderson,
This
General
is
Counsel.
yours?
Yes.
Okay, it got confusing there as to, because it says, okay, from Dick. So this is your recommendation too as to what the board should do?
No. I would need to clearly state this. The first piece of paper that has a line across it that says from Michael Anatone is Wes's response, which at the very first paragraph says, this memo is in response to a suggested policy submitted to the CA board by Dick Bolton. What is the next following page that is titled Columbia Council CA Board Member Election Policy, no other recognizing context. There's not a page number, date, or submitter. That is what was submitted by Dick Bolton, not an attorney.
I'm sorry, where it says Columbia Council CA Board Member, that starts with Dick's? It's not clear when you print it out at all. So
Yes,
that's where Dick's is?
That should have been starting the next page, yes.
This is on a separate page in what I have. but yes,
Not when you
this
print it
title-
off the, okay.
I can't speak to your printer. I can just tell you that from this title down, those are all Dick Bolton's.
Actually, okay, I apologize. I
packet, it's on a
copied it
separate
from the
page.
long list in order to put it in an email, and then it printed because we didn't get the PDF when we got the information late. Okay. So that's, okay, so this is Dick's.
Bill is his hand
All right, well, that clears that up.
up. Eric, Bill is his hand up.
Bill?
You're muted, Bill.
Your mute's working great, Bill.
It happens once a meeting, I'm sorry about that. At least once a meeting, right? With respect to the submission of blank ballots in this memo, as we're discussing this, have we contacted the village to find out if a ballot with no candidate checked off or no indication of a candidate preference would count as a legal ballot for the purposes of quorum? Do we know that?
I have not checked with the villages.
Yeah, I think each village would probably have their own rules on that, but that might be, that's a good question.
That's what's on the paper, I believe, and so if we're exploring that as the potential policy going forward, I wanted to make sure we got buy-in.
Yeah.
Because they're not our elections, they're the village elections, and I want to make sure that we're all as seamless as we can be.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? So the question I have for the board is, so at the end of Dick's proposal, basically it says, in the villages where CA is allocated votes, CA shall not vote for any candidate, but shall instead submit a blank ballot in order to allow for any quorum requirements to be met. So basically, CA would not be adding to any votes, but the CA ballots would count towards quorum. So that's Dick.
Yeah, I thought that was one way to handle it, and I guess we have to ask the villages whether they would accept the blank ballots. The reason this was put in this way is because there was a reluctance on the part of staff to do the regular procedure being to vote for whoever the winner, whoever got the most votes would get the CA votes. And so this is an alternative that we could revert to regular procedure and just make that mandatory.
Jenny?
Actually, I don't know. Again, villages can be different because in ours, we never use the CA votes to add to the winner. We didn't do that. So
Doesn't it get reported out?
it got reported out as the number of real people that voted and what the score was. And then, it would say if you needed the 96 or whatever it is in our village. So I think it could be up to the villages, or you could even word it in a way that says if applicable, or if this is, the village feels they would like this as a policy, they can implement their own policy that says, yes, give us the ballots towards our quorum.
Janet?
So if the blank ballot counts towards quorum, is there any reason that we can't just let it lie?
What do you mean?
So not have them, because the thing is the outcome of the election is the same either way. So as long as it counts towards quorum, so if we can verify that every village accepts blank ballots to count towards quorum, can that be the end of this discussion?
Yes, and I agree with Janet's proposal there, because, I would also caution this board for drafting and creating a policy that dictates how CA casts its ballots or votes for the very seats that the board members actually sit in for conflicts of interest principles. I've got that stated at the bottom of my memo. I would want to strongly caution you against that. So what Janet is proposing is actually a sound course of action.
So, I agree with what Jan's proposing, but I think it probably should be put into a policy, just so it's clear. Otherwise, we get back into the tradition thing, and sometimes traditions get lost or changed, so I think having things written down is helpful. Sherry?
Yeah, I think the point of contacting the villages is important here.
Yes.
Before we get involved in saying anything about how it's going to be for village elections, we need to find out what the response is from the villages that have participated or whose rules allow them to participate in this. These are village elections. Bill just said that. So, I think what's dicey is trying to create something without going back to the source of the authority, which are the villages. So this would be the thing to say, all right, this has come up as an issue, bring it back to the villages, and then come back to the board with the responses, or ask for testimony, or ask for the village to give some input. I think that would be wise.
So one thing we could do is propose a draft policy based on.
You had two people with their hands up already before.
I'm wondering if you would do a CA operational process like the next memo is, and then that way we can avoid making a policy about our own elections, but it would still be something documented?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm a couple of things. First, I'd be perfectly fine if all the villages allowed blank ballots. I don't care what name is on the ballot. It could say Ferd Ferkel for all I care. I do want us to keep supporting the villages in achieving their quorum. I don't see the conflict of interest, since the board would not be directing any particular election. It would not be impacting any particular vote. It would just be a blanket policy and be in the hands of the voters in that village. And I just say this talks about submitting blank ballots. In our village, at least, CA's never submitted any ballots. It's just we know how many ballots CA has, and that just number gets added to the total. It's not like CA has to write out ballots with somebody's name in them.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm thinking it would be good for the board to actually have something in hand to look at, and as Janet said, kind of like more of the operational practice that could be drafted by staff to come back to the board saying this. But I think we're conflating two issues here, which I think Wes had brought up. The question of, I'll say CA's votes for a quorum is actually separate from the vote for an election. Yeah. Okay, I mean, this is how it works in all.
I think different villages might work differently, though.
I mean, you know, you can show up. You know, the quorum is how many people, quote, show up, and you need 10% in some of the villages. Okay, they don't all have to vote. All they have to do is be there for the quorum. The fact that you're there for the quorum doesn't mean you have to participate in the meeting, doesn't mean you have to vote, anything like that. And what I hear us saying is, look, what we want to do is for the villages that need us to show up for the quorum, we want to be able to show up for the quorum. But we don't want to actually do voting for the reps. And that's why I think it's kind of like two issues, which we do conflate, okay? But I think we do want to figure out a way to make sure we show up for the quorum to give those. Now, there are two villages that don't care about us at all, and one is River Hill, and one is Kings Contrivance, because we don't have any votes. But, you know, for the other 8,
But they still care about us.
Yes, we do. We do. Thank you, River Hill. Thank you, King's Contrivance.
But no, but I think we need to separate that. We've got to figure out how to allow the quorum to occur, but we don't really want it to vote.
So
I thought that's what we were saying.
yeah,
Do that operationally, and I did speak last year with one of the attorneys from one of the villages, and that is simply done operationally, because we're the ones staff that go out and communicate with the villages concerning our votes. So we can easily do that.
So what I'd like to do is, I would like to get the villages' input on this, because we have 10 different voting systems for 10 different villages. I don't think anyone's the same. And I think to best do that, I think it'd be good to get something on paper that we could bring to the villages as a proposal, so they can have something to throw darts against. What I'd recommend is maybe going something along the lines of Andy's proposal, where the CA shows up for quorum, counts towards quorum, but doesn't cast any ballots, but the CA, whatever their allocation of votes, is added to quorum. Somehow figure out how to do that.
Only to the quorum.
Only to the quorum. Yeah. And then be able to establish that and be able to document that in a board vote. Leaky?
I have a process question. So this was not moved by staff at all. This came up in the Board Operations Committee that this wanted to be discussed about voting in village elections. At that time, we stated that it was a conflict of interest for the board to create, as Wes just described, a policy for their own seats. So we did not draft anything. We responded, and that was what was agreed in the BOC. We responded to what the board sent. So there are a variety of types of voting that are in this in what Dick Bolton put together. And so the general counsel responded to that. So I just wanted to clarify, there was nothing on the staff side that we have went and inventoried anything with the villages. So I want to be clear that if we're moving on with only the single element, I know we're not voting on it, but if we're going to draft something only on the single element, I would just like to understand there's consensus in the room on that, and that we're not going to then take on all of these other things that were also listed in the policy.
Alan had his hand up.
Alan?
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfectly fine procedure, at least if other villages are somewhat similar to Harper's Choice. Voting procedures are part of the bylaws, and those could be changed. So if we would it be, I think the thing to go out to all the villages would it be acceptable for CA to simply say, we are here to in our village, it's an annual meeting for the purpose of maintaining quorums. Our number of seats or whatever they are here. Please count us. Yes. And would that be sufficient for their election policy processes?
Dick?
Yeah, well, obviously, we need to talk to the villages and find out what they need from us for their elections. And if they want blank ballots, we can give them blank ballots. If they want something else, whatever it is they need, let's provide it so we're not getting in the way. The problem this also addresses is, and I hate to bring this up, but in the last election, there was staff interference in the election. There was information that I think most of the people on the board feel was confidential that was released. There was something of a statement about the quality of the.
I'm going to interject here. I'm going to. I'm going to interject here. We already have an ethics policy that covers this.
Okay, good.
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I think the only thing that, and we're at time here. So I think the thing that we really need to cover is how we're going to approach the counting of CA ballots in those villages that basically have CA ballots.
In relation to a quorum.
In relation to a quorum. So what I want to do is make sure that the CA count counts towards quorum and nothing else.
Right.
So if we can, if you could help draft.
I can do that.
I'm going to call it a policy, but if it's a procedure or memo, whatever the right terminology is, I'll leave that up to you. And if you could draft that quickly and then send that out to the board and also the villages so they can comment on it quickly, so we can get input from the villages to make sure that that meets their requirements. Andy and then Alan, then we're out of time.
I was just going to say that, I mean, already CA meets with the village managers on a regular basis. And this is a great topic to bring up at that meeting.
Yeah,
and instead of, because let's face it, the village managers.
I just want to get something on paper so that everybody, so that I know everybody's, including the boards, got the same thing in front of them too. I want something on paper.
Instead of creating a different.
Yeah, but we're all talking. I don't. You can do it in the regular village meeting. That's fine. But I just want something on paper so that we're all seeing the same thing.
And I would agree with that. And I guess it doesn't need to be answered now, I don't think, but I'm not sure what the difference between a board, whatever we're calling this, and a board policy. What I want is something that has the effect of the board so that it's not up to any future individual staff member to say, I'm going to do something different.
Yeah. So it's got to have force. But I'll please guide the board on what document is appropriate and has force, and if you can help write that document, it should be like 2 sentences. I hope.
Of course, it's going to be more than 2 sentences, but yes, I will.
He's a lawyer. He can't say hello without more than 2 sentences.
He's a lawyer. I'm an engineer, and I try to get it all in one line. A very long line, but just one line. Okay, we're out of time for this topic. The next topic is CA operational process for tree maintenance. So one thing I'll notice is it's end of October. We're coming into winter snow season, and snow season brings the occasional ice storm, also brings, which has an effect on trees. And so the concern that I've heard from residents is that especially people whose lots are backed up against CA open space where you have some of these really large old trees that might not be in the healthiest state, and that could be one windstorm or one ice storm away from breaking and adversely affecting their houses. The question I have is how does CA address that? How can residents address that? And what's the process for how if a resident feels like there's a CA tree that is a potential hazard to their house, how can they go about addressing that?
I'll answer that. So there is a work ticket system, and they can call the open space number that's in the web, that's on the web. And we have certified tree experts that would go out and respond. And we respond to requests for information, requests for evaluation of the tree. And it's not a huge number, but we do respond to them, and we're also out in the field. Now, we're not behind everyone's house. You know, we're in the open space, we're on pathways, we're at tot lots, we're at bridges, but we're not behind everyone's house. And I think, honestly, they don't want us there a lot of times. But if there is a hazard tree that someone identifies what they think might be a hazard tree, we have certified experts that go out and look. And, you know, sometimes it is a hazard tree that needs to be addressed. It might just be a branch or two. And just as often as not, it's not actually a hazard tree based on the certified experts that we have. If it is a high level, something that might be truly dangerous, we might bring in an outside person to look at it also to verify what we see. But we are out all the time looking at trees in the open space, and so that's the problem.
So I do have one further question. So if you have a tree in open space and a hazardous branch that's over a resident's property line, and you deem it a hazard, would CA go out and address that, or would you instruct, how would that work?
So if there's a branch that falls, that's on a tree that's on the open space, that goes over property line, it's identified as a hazard, we would take that branch down.
Okay. And my last question before I open it up is there an appeals process if a resident disagrees with the assessment?
I suppose they could go out and get their own expert, but, you know, we have experts that are trained, and but no.
Yep, thanks. Alan?
Yeah, I think, Dennis, you know, I have nothing but the highest respect for how you and your team handle open space and your responsiveness to anytime I've brought up something I see. And, so my question doesn't come from any personal experience. I'm really asking, in the last X number of years, maybe 5 years, I don't know, I don't expect you to have a particular number, do we have any cases, let me back up a step, my understanding is that the law says, at least this is what I was told, that if a tree's on my property and it falls on somebody else's house, that's their responsibility, not mine, that they have to pay for repairs. I don't have to pay for the repairs. So I assume that that's the case if a tree's on CA's property and it falls on somebody's house. Do we have any cases in the last reasonable number of years that you'd know of a branch, a tree, whatever, causing damage to somebody's fence, play structure, house, shed, whatever, that we have said to them, sorry, it's your responsibility?
Janet?
So if a branch is over someone else's yard, could they cut it off?
Yes.
So
They have air rights.
Yeah, so
That's what it comes down to, it's air rights.
So basically, a resident has two options. They could cut it off, or they could ask you to come in and make an assessment, and you would potentially cut it off if you deem it dangerous.
Correct.
Okay. And Jenny?
Yeah. Dennis, I second everything Alan said about the work your guys do. You're fantastic. Just two quick questions. One, if the trees are being taken down, and especially, you know, in areas where in some cases it was significant number of trees behind X number of houses, I don't see anything in here that says we need to let the neighbors know that, by the way, tomorrow we're taking 30 trees down or something like that. Is that something that you built into your procedure? And the second thing is replacement schedule. That seems to be a big concern when a lot of trees have been taken down and nobody knows when they're going to be replaced. And I know they're costly, but is there some way we can work on time frame there as well?
So start with the first question. So we do notify if we have a large number of trees that are coming down, and we haven't had that for a little while. We've gone through most of the big groves of ash trees. So we haven't had that 50 tree stand that we actually did have at one point in time. We have maybe 6 or 7 or 8, but we would always notify the village and let them know if there's a stand of trees. In addition to which, we try to put door hangers on if it's in close proximity to a residence.
Okay.
These oftentimes are not, though. These oftentimes are buried. They're back in the open space.
Yeah.
And then in terms of tree replacement, we're going to probably install 500 trees this year, approximately. There's a round number. And there is some regeneration that takes place, so not every tree gets replaced 1-to-1. Sometimes it's actually 2-to-1. Sometimes there's enough enough standing in the open space that we don't feel like it's necessary to put more trees in. One of the things that happens oftentimes, you see it in the streets in Columbia, is that the trees are planted too close together, and they crowd each other out. So you want this look when they first go in, and then 20 years later, what you have is they're too close together and they're crowding each other out. And we are owners in perpetuity, and I feel like we have to take the long view.
Okay, thank you.
Sherry?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the other issue that often arises is that people are really not sure whose trees are on whose property and who's responsible for what. And so a lot of the trees that are in the front of our properties, people know they're on CA property, but they're actually county trees. And in the cul-de-sacs, if you have, around area, there are usually 2 or 3 trees in there. Those are not CA property. So I think one of the things that our village has done is we try to put that kind of information in our newsletter so that it's clear to people that if you think it's a county tree, call these folks and do this. If something goes down, here's what you have to keep in mind, and give the phone numbers so that people get that information immediately.
Sure, if you could circulate that, what you provide, that could be very helpful for the other villages.
Yeah, we probably have a write-up.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
That'd be really nice. Any further discussion on this topic?
No.
Okay, thank you. Next, that brings us to CA operational process for encroachments on CA property.
Yeah, I'm the one that asked for this several times, so I'm impressed with the chart, and looks like you have a very thorough system. Do you have any data on exactly how many cases you've declared that they are encroaching, how long it takes to actually get action on those, and what the results are? Anything that would show that this is producing something?
So this whole...
Because the one case I keep trying to get an answer on, I can never get an answer
What's
on.
interesting about some cases, and this case that I might imagine that you might be speaking to in general terms, is actually not an encroachment. That what's interesting when you go out in the open space, and I look at some things, and I said, damn, that's on our property. And it turns out when you actually go out and survey it, and in one case, I surveyed it twice because I didn't believe it. I thought for sure that was on our property and was a problem. Well, it's not always on our property. I don't have any data about how many. What I will say, though, is that this started before COVID, and we kind of got shut down during COVID, and we're getting ready to start back up somewhat in earnest. There is additional money in the community ops budget, and that administrative position is to support that effort. So that, we're going to start with the ones that are the most egregious and the most serious. And there are some that are relatively minor, like landscaping. And technically, if somebody wants to cut the open space, they are encroaching.
Okay, just a follow-up quick question. Is this an encroachment when someone or a couple of houses have drain pipes that come from their homes across their land, across a little bit of CA land and into the stream? Is that encroachment?
If they went into our land, it would be.
And you're doing something about that?
The ones that do cross our land, yes. The ones, I think...
into the stream, too, the water running into our stream.
So in some cases, the stream itself is a force of nature, and it moves. And so when I went out to look at one case in particular, I thought because of where the stream showed up on a map, it was in the open space, but lo and behold, the stream had moved. And that what we thought was crossing over the open space and dumping into the stream, it was dumping into the stream, but the stream was no longer on CA open space. I want to say, and it's interesting. And there are a lot of nuances to it, but if it was going across CA open space and dumping into the stream, which was on CA open space, we would definitely address it. But it's not always the case. And it looks like it is. If you go out there and look at it, you say, damn, that looks like my property. But it's not.
Alan?
A couple of things. Do we recognize, and I'm not a lawyer, so I may be butchering these terms, but I believe in the law there's like the concept of a de minimis violation that, it's like doesn't mean a whole lot. And to me, I would weigh that, in my mind, I compare that also to what would the impact be on the homeowner? Like, if they had a gazillion-foot deck and 2 inches comes over our line or whatever, and they'd have to replace the whole deck for 2 inches or whatever, do we take that kind of thing into account? Or do we just say you're over our line?
Yes, that is part of the calculus, and I work with CD Res on these encroachment issues, and we definitely take that into account.
Great, thank you. The other question I had is, maybe I'm misreading this chart, which I think is great, but I'm looking at the top left blue box that says identify possible encroachment. And it doesn't look like from there's any engagement with the property owner.
Well,
It goes from there, and you've identified the possible encroachment, and now you're not going to talk to the homeowner.
Well, honestly, I don't want to cause someone a lot of angst and anxiety over something that's only possible. So the idea is that before we go out and we knock on doors and put door hangers up, we verify. Otherwise, you're going to knock on the door and say, hey, look, we think you're on a property. The deck is over the line, and then it turns out it's not.
But there's no line, there's no arrow that comes back to engagement with the property owner once you've identified the possible encroachment. It goes to...
Notification letter that goes out.
Okay, but it seems to me there's...
Okay, so I guess we send a letter out to notify the property owner, but we don't necessarily knock on the door and say hi.
Well, but I mean, if there's the kind of back and forth that I assume would need to happen to get to what Wes was just talking about, so what would it take to remediate this? What's the impact on you? It seems like there's some contact there that needs to happen.
Yeah, so that absolutely happens. It's not a case where we send a letter out and it's a hard stop, or and then there's a conversation that happens, and generally it's not 2 inches though.
Okay, I understand that, but so I'm just saying in terms of this chart, and I hate to complexify something that's already needing to be unreasonably complex, that's not clear to me from this chart, and if homeowners are going to look at this, they might say, wait a minute,
So
when do I get into this?
So the identify possible encroachment, there's an arrow that goes over to CD Res research, verification, and tracking.
Right.
Then it goes down to internal review, action plan, committee, and then there's another arrow that goes to the formal notification process. So that's the flow for that. So
Maybe if you could just add who's being notified, that was not completely clear to me because you.
Right, and this is just a flow chart. I mean, this is a flow chart for a very large, complex process.
I understand. Thank you.
And this is just a model. Sherry?
I was just going to say, I think this is also an educational opportunity that we have at the village level.
Yeah.
I know that the CARES groups have been going around and trying to let people know that extending their green lawns an extra foot or an extra 2 feet and pulling out vegetation and and bushes and things of that kind so that it looks pretty is not the environmentally sound thing to do, because every bush that's planted, everything that's there is helping to slow the flow of water.
Right.
So I think a lot of people, if they understood that was part of why CA allows things to stay in the ground and allows what comes down to stay there and be part of the natural environment, it would make more sense to them. So again, this is something that it's an educational function. And there are some really good community groups that are working through the Watershed Advisory Committee and through other organizations that have really good language. Again, inserts in newsletters. We really try to push this stuff out.
Yeah.
Thank you. That brings us to time on this section. And Dennis, thank you for all your hard work in open space addressing these issues. Next on the agenda is the draft CEO evaluation policy. So a copy of it is in the packet. So I've been actually working with Monica, going back and forth, taking some of the suggestions that were brought on the board the last proposal. And so I've working with Monica, made several changes to it. We've sort of gone from a 1 to 4 system, which is actually similar to what we used last year, except last year was 0 to 4. So basically what we did was we combined meets some and meets most into just a single topic. She helped refine the meetings beforehand. So we basically have 2 meetings. One is sort of a calibration meeting where the board can meet, discuss what the process is, how it's going to work. And the second meeting would be the board comes in and actually submits their evaluations, and those all get combined into a overall score and an overall evaluation. The other main change here is that we go to a median system versus a mean system. So in prior years, all the individual members, their scores would be averaged, and that could cause some issues if people are on the extreme scale one side or the other. Here, this basically looks at medians, so that people on the extreme are not unduly impacting the overall result. So it's basically looking at what the middle 2 members are, and that's what median is. So with that, I will open up to the floor for comments. Janet.
I appreciate the progress that you made on this.
Thanks.
I think it is a lot more concise, and it provides much clearer guidance. Is there any, so if the ratings come in and the board has discussion points, is there opportunity, like what happens, so you can discuss it, but is there any process for reviewing or adjusting or? So there's 2 meetings. One is the initial meeting where there's no votes taken. It's just, right. And there's an opportunity to discuss it. There's an opportunity to not just discuss the process, but actually discuss the sort of the 360 part, the evaluation that the CEO presents of themselves, and also board individual feelings is, okay, this is how the year went. This is some of the significant points that should be reflected in the evaluation that occurred during the year. So I believe that first meeting is where board members should try to understand where each other is sort of coming from, and what are the key points that you want other board members to be cognizant of when they're filling out their forms. So it's not like people are coming in from 10 different perspectives. They now sort of have an idea of where other board members are, and they might learn things that, oh, that's something that I didn't account for, and then might take that into account. Then each member would have an opportunity over the next week or 2 to reflect, submit their evaluation, fill out their evaluation, fill out their comments, and then bring that to the board meeting. They could even fill it out at the board meeting. And then those evaluations would be combined in an anonymous fashion. At that point, there's no chance to change once you've submitted it. That's it. And it'll be all done anonymously. And I hope you will recommend that people fill them out ahead of time.
I would recommend people fill it out ahead of time. That's my recommendation. Again, I can't force someone to do something on a particular time scale.
Well aware.
Andy?
So, Ferg, is that supposed to happen at the first meeting?
What?
What you described? The discussion among the board members.
So the key thing to happen at the first meeting is to, A, discuss the process and the ramifications, and B, it also does allow an opportunity for the board members to discuss what they feel the important points of the year are that they want other board members to be aware of.
I think you need to add that then, because if you read what's here, it just sounds like all we're doing is talking about the president's contract, the forms, the goals, objectives, and the strategic plan. It doesn't even say anything about talking about what you described, and I think that's an important part.
Okay, I can add that as.
Yeah, and that helps because that does say the board gets to talk.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you got some words that I can jot down.
You want to email them to him?
Or you want to
Maybe
email?
something along the lines
Like
of
Janet.
looking at the goals themselves and discussing examples of.
Progress.
Review the, how about review the goals over the course of the year?
The goals themselves or the progress toward?
Review the progress of the goals over
Review
the past year.
self-evaluation. Because the president's submitted her self-evaluation, and so why don't we just add, just discuss the self-evaluation, and then we can all go off and do our votes.
Okay.
Well, to just say review the self-evaluation means we don't talk about our own.
Yeah, well, it's got to be broader than that. But basically, it's really to review the year and review the key progress, the president's performance. So I will add that in. I also.
Put in an example.
I also added, it didn't make this packet, but I'll add an example of how to compute medians.
Sure.
So just for those of us that don't have 8th grade math books in our bookshelf, any other comments on the process? Aleki?
So I did see that actionable steps were added in terms of feedback, so I thought that was helpful. I'll just restate the other comment I had said previously, which is that it's all being done anonymously, and I would think that the performance reviews would, each board member would be comfortable sharing who said what.
So the comment I'll make is that this is an evaluation coming from the board. And I think the evaluation should be from the board. And even when the final evaluation comes out, it's not going to, I don't foresee it being 10 different board member evaluations and 10 different comments all stapled together. Part of the goal of the second meeting is to take those comments and really summarize it. So we have board comments. But Jenny?
Yeah, actually when we met with Monica, she had no problem with that, the confidentiality. She did want to express other concerns, which you've made those changes, but she had absolutely no problem with confidentiality, so.
Yeah, just one final thing. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here to also, in that first meeting, discuss things that, like some of the comments last year were operational versus board-driven, or were board-driven versus operational. So making sure that what's being used to evaluate is actually within the president CEO's control and not something that the board is supposed to be driving.
Yes, and that's hoping that gets captured in what Andy's proposing. That fair? Alan?
I guess I just want to say that what Lakey, you said, and what Ginny, you said to me are not mutually exclusive. I mean, I can hold that my hope as well that we be willing to be open about what our ratings and our thoughts and our comments are, and there may be people who aren't, and I want to make sure we allow for that.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? So with those changes, I'll submit changes, and we can put this on the next meeting for a vote.
Okay.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the G. Brian, you moved to amend the agenda to add a discussion on the Lake Elkhorn, adding that to the November agenda.
Yes. Yeah, and this is sort of following up on the last meeting where you asked me to put the questions together, and also responding to the residents and the report from Longreach about their concerns. And there are so many questions, I thought it really needed time to do that. So that's why I asked if we could discuss this. And I saw tonight, especially when questions coming up with Sherry and Alan, which were sort of interesting because I've sent out things that actually address those questions. And I just want to say, one of the things that seems to be not clear is that mitigating stormwater in the watershed is a known technology. It's the state is what people do now, And 10 years ago, Alan, we did a demonstration project on your street at the bottom there, the Lake Elkhorn project, the Wood Elves project. And then there was this rapid stormwater assessment as well, which identifies where you can get the best bang for the buck. Now, the other thing is what I was really concerned with, we haven't really connected with, it doesn't seem like, and that's one of the questions, we haven't perhaps connected with the county. And I have been in conversation with Mark Richmond, and I've copied some of that conversation. And he is working with the Department of Public Works on Howard County. So, you know, the questions were sent out to smart sheets earlier in the week. I've got copies here. We did a slight update to them, and I put that through smart sheets as well. So I think we need the time at the next meeting to discuss the answers we should be getting. There are some very important questions that we should be able to get answers now. I mean, most of these questions are out there back early in the year, January and April, and I'd like the board to hopefully support having this at the next meeting for at least half an hour.
Got a question. Sherry, then Andy.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just a little confused about who would be answering the questions.
The questions have been sent to the staff to answer. These are CA. When I sent out the questions, I got various recommendations. The first 5 questions are directly related to the CA. They are questions that are asked by MDE and the Army Corps of Engineers. They ask the CA these particular questions. They're responsible for those things. And I also put exactly where you can find those questions. So we've got like MDE 5G, January the 18th. So you know quite clearly when these questions were asked. So we don't have to wait until the MDE or Army Corps of Engineers come back and give whatever report. We should have the answers to those questions now. So and that will answer a lot of the questions and concerns that people have got, the community have got. At the moment, the board can't do anything because we don't have answers to the questions. So I put down those first 5 questions, and this is what I sent out. And you should have got a copy of this.
Yeah. I think, well, I just wanted to say that I think a lot of the questions that have been asked, the answers are going to come from WSSI. My concern about that is that when people work on these large grant types of projects, my understanding is a lot of times what they do is they wait until they have all of the answers and then they send all of the answers back at one time. And I think given the high level of concern in the community, it would make, I think, good sense to ask that we be able to get pieces, smaller chunks, rather than wait for the whole thing to be answered, because there are lots of issues that have been brought up. It's too much for the board to handle,
right.
And I think it's too much for individuals in the community to handle.
And this is the sort of questions I wanted to do at the next meeting.
But I'm not sure a lot of that can be answered by CA. What I heard from having WSSI here is that they were going to be answering a lot of these questions. In fact,
they weren't directed at WSSI. They were directed directly at the company association. These questions, if you read the questions in the documents, the January the 18th one and the April one, you'll see their questions for CA.
So I want to clarify something. I think we can only ask questions to staff who might then go out to WSSI to answer the questions. I don't think we can directly engage WSSI.
But I think what I'm suggesting is that we come up with the types of questions that we want to be relayed to WSSI, along with a timeline that says we would like to get a smaller chunk that addresses this issue by this time. Is that possible? I'm not saying that the board is directing anything. I'm just saying that making it into smaller pieces, I think, is going to allow us to digest it and talk about it, rather than trying to do this cosmic type of grant.
Yeah, I agree. Smaller pieces is generally better. Andy?
Yeah, I'll follow up on what Shari was saying, because, you know, the letters from the Army Corps of Engineers and MDE and everything all are addressed WSSI because they're the overall, they have to answer them. Okay. You know, even it says it's a question for CA, it's going to have to come from WSSI. CA is not responding to the Army Corps of Engineers, and CA is not responding to MDE because they weren't asked. I mean, you know, the IRT thing is asking the questions of the submitter, and the submitter is WSSI. So one of the things I don't want to do is I don't want CA to spend any of its resources answering questions that SSI has to answer back to the Army Corps of Engineers and MDE. And so I think Shari's got a better suggestion is figure out what questions you want asked, you know, in the smaller chunks, and then send those back to WSSI for answer.
I hear that, but I'm not sure I agree with it. The question that I hear Brian asking is he wants something on the agenda. I'm not sure how we're going to get it on the agenda if we're not taking any votes tonight, but be that as it may, I think it's a good idea. I think, Brian, you could go through the board request submission and put it in writing, and hopefully we get an answer. I agree that we shouldn't do WSSI's work for them at all, but if there's a question that we can answer, that if there's a question that CA staff has the answer to and the CA board wants the answer to that question, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't ask it, regardless of what the source of the question was, whether it was from the MDE report questions to WSSI or coming from a resident or coming from an individual board member, wherever it came from. So and I'm also perfectly comfortable with the staff saying, we don't know the answer to that. Only WSSI has that answer, or only MDE has that answer, or somebody else has the answer. But I would like, in the interest of breaking this down, in the interest of getting some of the smaller questions answered, and the two methods are not in opposition to each other, we can do exactly what Sherry and Andy are suggesting, in addition to asking staff to answer a few questions that we think are under their purview and their control, and that would help get information out sooner, it would help break it down, it would help us be able to talk to residents more about it and understand more about the project.
So the key thing is I want to make sure what the goal is of this agenda item. So is the goal for the board to generate questions and then formally submit them to CA and then eventually to WSSI, or is there a different goal that you had in mind? What's the goal of this agenda item?
The goal is to respond to the community that have asked these questions.
No, I realize that.
Okay. So the goal of the meeting is to review the answers that the staff give us to these questions. And as Alan said, if you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. But there are a lot of questions here. There's 19 questions. So some of them they should be able to answer. There might be no, they haven't, or whatever it is. But we need to know. So we need to know what the staff understand as their responsibility. Okay, sorry.
Andy?
I think if you want to go that route, what you have to first discuss is what are the questions that the board wants to ask. I know Brian has a lot of good questions, but those are Brian's questions. I'd like to know what the board really wants to ask. The second thing is, haven't we invited the county to the November meeting? Aren't they, isn't most of the agenda devoted to the county?
I mean, I can answer that. When this was amended, I pulled it up on what the BOC approved. And it is a presentation on the general plan update for 45 minutes, our budget discussion, which needs to be robust, which is an hour. And then the CA's operational anti-nepotism personnel policy. I mean, it's a completely full agenda in November.
And we just added the vote on the evaluation.
That's what I was saying. We just added a vote.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jenny?
My concern is if we say we'll wait for WSSI to give the answers, they will have already filed it with the appropriate agency. and the public didn't have a chance to really see it. So I don't know how you get the information to the public in a timely fashion, so if they have any concerns or we have any concerns, we can express them. That's the point I'm missing here, is, many times we're like after the fact and then, oh, too bad, it's happened, it's done. That's the part that bothers me.
Andy?
I thought when WSSI was here, they said that as part of the process, when they file their response, they have to notify everyone who has put in a comment that the response is there. So it's up to WSSI to notify everybody who did the commenting.
Yeah, my only concern about this, and the reason I brought this up about we're trying to get it in smaller pieces, is that when you do a grant project, you usually wait until you have all the pieces of the project, and then you send the whole thing. And so what I'm thinking is, I think just about everybody has read all of those documents, maybe several times, or can, go back and look at them again. It sort of chunks out. If you look at the stuff from the Department of the Environment, I mean, there are actually sections there. So some of them address biological, implications. Some of them address water quality implications. So there are sections there. And being able to develop a handful of questions, I'm not saying 25, that would be overwhelming, but a few questions at a time, and then to structure how we get the answers back so that it's chunked out.
And the questions should line up with the flow chart. So, I mean, you want to ask questions that are pertinent to where we are in the flow chart. So,
yeah, I think that's a good point.
So that's the other thing. So you don't necessarily want to ask design questions before they've come up with, even had a chance to come up with a design. So
design criteria questions.
You can certainly ask criteria questions when they're looking at criteria, but you want to make sure that whatever questions we're asking line up with where we are in the process. And keep in mind, this is a multi-year process. This is not something they're not going to be doing a stream restoration tomorrow and saying we're done. So it's a multi-year, fairly long, drawn-out process. So it's not. So there's still ample time. So the key thing is trying to figure out what are the relevant questions to ask today.
Just a quick question, a quick comment on the flow chart.
Actually, I'll get Dennis first.
So I'm sitting here wondering, the answers aren't going to change when you get there. You're going to get the answers in a week or a month or whenever they submit all the answers. The answer's not going to change about the biological uplift, whatever it is. You're going to be able to respond to the answers when they come in. And so I'm not sure what the advantage of trying to piece them out is. It doesn't change how you might feel eventually. You might just get this little bit of information sooner, but answering it sooner is not going to allow us to change the answer. If there's no biological uplift, that's the answer. So I'm not sure why we're going through this exercise, and it's a lot of staff time, it's WSSI time, and all that time is money. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be careful, but we're going to get the answers. We're going to get them.
Alan?
My understanding is that what Brian's asking are the things that CA is going to have to provide to WSSI anyway.
Yes.
So whether the staff time is taken now or waiting until WSSI formally asks the question, it's the same staff time. And the advantage to me of the idea of breaking it, I see this as part of the, I see the two ideas as two parts of the same thing. Break it down to smaller chunks. It's more easily digestible. Most of us are not experts on this. When I read that whole, my first reaction to that 11-page thing from MDE is to my eyes glaze over, and I have to chunk it out as I read through it. It helps to have a few answers at a time, and getting information out to the community sooner helps. Holding information only allows people to make up stories, and those stories are never good. They're always bad, and that's not good communication practice.
Jenny?
Yeah, we're saying we go by the flow chart, but are we satisfied the flow chart really has all the items in it that will allow somebody to get involved in a timely fashion before, it's too late. And I like, for example, did Long Reach ever send a letter? I heard something about they have a new position. Did we?
They have voted to take a pause until some of those answers come back.
Were we going to get a letter on that, or,
I don't know.
Okay, what I'm saying is the flow chart doesn't say that. It says Long Reach support.
Well, because how would CA know that Long Reach was going to take a second vote on it?
Yeah, okay, I'm just trying to find out, there are other things in the flow chart before we say that flow chart is absolutely the best it
I don't
can
think
be.
that's a project schedule. I mean, it's a flow chart.
a flow chart.
The general ideas of what's happening next.
Well,
Something as detailed as, Long Reach Village Board votes, I don't think would be captured on something like that.
Well, the first one says they support it. If that's changed, it needs to be changed on the flow chart. It needs to be.
CA has not been notified by the Long Reach Village Board.
That's what I was
Staff has
asking.
not been notified.
That's what I was
just
asking.
For the record.
So I think eventually Long Reach Village will notify CA and the board of their new position, I assume.
I expect so.
Brian said his hand.
Okay. I just want to finish this thought. And I know they want, and my understanding is they want to take a pause before certain questions to get answers to certain questions. Those certain questions could be the basis of what we're looking for.
I think the key is the village board, when they voted originally, was generally supportive. The support was potentially more nuanced than they are in favor of. So, I think as anyone who has an interest in this project, they are interested in following it closely, being able to respond, and to getting answers to questions that have been put out there. So I don't think it's so different from what most people are looking for.
No, I just thinking it might serve a good basis for questions. Brian?
I think one of the biggest concerns was, in the presentation by Dennis last time, he made it very clear they weren't going to be doing anything in the watershed. And then WSSI said basically the same thing. But then we got from the community and from myself, we got all these questions about the watershed and the technology for dealing with the watershed that's feeding these streams, especially the 120 outfalls that you heard that Sharon talked about today. I think you can't ignore where the rain falls. And this is something that we should be addressing. And so that's an important part of the discussion at the next meeting.
So I think we're way over time for this topic. So I know the next meeting is jam-packed. But so I think if we add this to the agenda, we're talking maybe 10 minutes at most.
Can I comment on that? So
Comment.
if there is going to actually be an idea that it's added to the agenda, I have to clarify that the 19 questions came in. We internally as staff have started the discussion of exactly what Andy Stack just said. Are these board questions or are these an individual questions? As we're sorting through them, some might have quick answers, some are going to have longer answers. Timeline in response. And then as has been indicated, there are some that we will not have the answer to. So I want to just remind, and I know I talk about timeline a lot, but this is what we do operationally. We have to have everything posted by next Friday if you put it on the next meeting agenda, which means that what we would normally do in answering those board questions is say we can answer these in a week, we need 30 days for these, that kind of thing. If you put it on the agenda, and already at time agenda, we will have answers that can be provided in a matter of days. So I just want to be very clear that it will probably not be robust. I would instead suggest what a few people have alluded to, which is perhaps the use of time would be better spent on what are the actual questions the whole board would like to have answered.
So here's what we could do. Instead of actually putting on the agenda, we could use the questions only section to generate questions regarding this. Would that be a reasonable?
Well, these questions I mean, I was asked to submit my questions. I submitted them to Smartsheets, then they weren't going to be board suggestions. I did get board questions on here. There's probably about 5 of them are board questions. Then I got those community questions as well. There's my questions. So, and there was the MDE questions. So there were questions from everywhere. And it seems like it's a lot. I went through the process. I was told to submit my questions, so it seems reasonable to expect to get answers.
Alan?
Yeah, I think the questions only thing is a way to go. But the other thing I would say is, although I'm a big supporter of community awareness and the 1-week rule, which we already have for years pulled down to 6 days instead of a week, but we often have documents show up a day or two before the board meeting. We get a message from the staff that says we've added this to the packet, we've added that to the packet, well after the packet has already been put together. I don't want that to be everything we do, but something like this, it seems to me perfectly reasonable to say the topic is to discuss or to hear answers to some questions, and here are the questions, and then the answers may not show up in the packet. It may show up the day of or the day before, and to give the staff more time. And even still, there might not be enough time. I absolutely agree that some of the questions might take longer, and that's part of the response. I have no problem with that. But I would like to see us keep the discussion alive, and I definitely don't want to wait till WSSI finishes its submission and puts it all together.
Sherry?
Yeah, so is there any reason not to do this in December? My understanding is that there's not any big time pressure right now as far as decision-making is concerned. This is information gathering. And there is information that the community wants to have. So if we can put it into December, we create a little bit more space there for a little bit more robust conversation. And then we see where we may need to have a second iteration of a similar type.
I think that makes sense, but that doesn't stop us from generating questions now. We can certainly generate questions as we think of them and try to combine them and try to organize them. And certainly, if we have some interesting questions during the questions only period, 1 or 2 of them, that could be also another opportunity to bring up the most pressing questions, so to speak. But yeah, I think moving this to December, if that's okay, given our current schedule, probably makes more sense, so that we don't just blow this off in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So then you'd be saying instead of 10 minutes in November, you could actually dedicate an hour or
you could dedicate
45 minutes in December. But we do the prep work before that. Okay.
So that brings us to the conclusion of the board discussion. Next topic is...
Eric?
What?
Eric?
Yes? Oh, sorry.
Eric?
So sorry. Bill?
I had my hand up here.
Sorry. Go.
That's okay.
The other side, Bill.
It's getting late. Just a final button on that. If we're going to talk about putting this topic on an agenda in December, I just want to remind everybody we've got a board ops meeting coming up in November. Come on out to that meeting and let's discuss it at that point.
Yep, that's exactly where I want to go with this. Thank you. So next we have questions only. Questions only?
Yep.
Going around. Janet.
I just wanted to call everyone's attention to next month at CA in the President's Report, the Quiet Pride. I saw Liz putting that display up yesterday at the Columbia Arts Center, so I recommend everyone go out to see it.
Thanks. Alan.
Yeah. I'm assuming that under the bills, the Howard, are we just doing President's Report or are we doing the whole?
The question only for everything.
For everything, okay. For CB 52, the property tax credit that was passed, I'm assuming that we didn't, as an organization, weigh in on that at all. Is that accurate? So I just want to flag that raises for me, and this is not a Wes issue, it's not a Lakey issue, it's not a Eric issue in terms of it's not about any individual, because this has been ever since been on the board since 2014. We've had a problem with how we get our voice in a timely way when we want to get our voice in and not have things just pass us by. So this is not about blaming anybody for having it, but I just wanted, it just raises to me, because we did have some board members who indicated some interest. We had community members. We had one of our advisory committees asking us to weigh in on this. We never got it together, and I'm saying we, collectively, all of us, we never got it together to say we want to take a position on this. And to me, that it's happening so often under so many different administrations. It's a systemic thing. It's not an individual's fault, and we need to really figure out a way, whether it's fast tracking certain things based on that kind of timeline or something. It's the current procedure, particularly in light of our strategic plan initiative to be more to beef up our advocacy. We're falling down on that. We're not giving ourselves an opportunity to really be the advocates we could be. I'm not taking any position on whether we would have been in favor or against. That would have been a board decision. But we never gave ourselves a chance to take a position. And I think that's problematic.
Any further questions, Lakey?
I had a question. I actually had a question for the chair.
Okay.
I have been directly informed by one of CA's vice presidents that he was asked if he would be willing to serve as interim president of CA with some sense of urgency. I have now been contacted by people in the community that have heard about this conversation. And I wanted to ask you directly, because I thought that was the best thing to do, if you could clarify for me my own position with this organization, since I have a 4-year contract.
I am unaware of any such discussions, and anything beyond this is a personnel matter. Any further questions?
I have a different question, but just want to, in your report, like you mentioned that the Homefront Tennis Club had the pickleball open. How did it go?
Incredibly well.
Good.
So we got really good reviews from the organization that hosted it. There are great pictures. We actually had a drone go up over all the courts so you could see, it was quite impressive. But we got rave reviews, and we actually had really good weather, so that really helped. But it was at maximum capacity.
Great.
And many people said that they would be back to play on our court, so that was a win as well.
That's super. Could maybe get a blog article?
Sure. Yeah, we did some posts, but I think it was on social media.
Oh,
We didn't I don't think we did anything on the blog.
Okay, thank you.
Brian.
One of the most successful questions asked by the CA on the website was about village centres. And it really got a lot of traction, which is probably something that's really important in people's minds. I've never seen so many people answer a question, which I thought was really good. I was just going to suggest perhaps that we let the village owners, the people who own the village centres, know about this input, so it might reflect in any updates that they do to their village centre.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not so much a question about the report, but I want to second or third I did read, Lakey, your blog post about diversity in the community, and I appreciated the position of the data from all sides and the importance of it. I think that's it was a good, I'm not going to call it a first step, because I know it's not the first thing you or the organization has done, but I think that's it's always important to disaggregate data and really break it down and not just sit back on our laurels.
Any further questions, comments? Proposing top. What?
Really quick, Eric?
Sure.
Happy Halloween to everybody.
Happy Halloween. Is it Halloween today?
Where's the candy bag?
Yeah. It'll be Monday, but,
I thought the board meeting bled over into Halloween. Proposed new topics? Going once, going twice?
We've had the one.
What?
But anyway.
Okay.
Okay, Chair Marks, I'd like to congratulate CA for being recognized in the county as a top employer for those with disabilities. So thank you very much for all your hard work in that area. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Okay, any objections? Meeting is adjourned at 10:40.